Listen, you need to move out. We've decided to stay in his house. What? It's too crowded for us newly married couple to have everyone here, and this isn't even your house. If you don't like it, find your own place. Sophie can stay here if she wants. Kicking her out is unfair. My mom's words made me feel relieved, but my brother and his wife were still unhappy. This happened 5 years ago when my younger brother, right out of college, brought his girlfriend home and said he wanted to marry her. My name is Sophie. I'm 33 now, and my brother, who's 5 years younger, got married right after college. His wife was still in college, 3 years behind him. My brother and his wife really wanted to tie the knot right away, but our parents suggested waiting until she finished college. Oddly enough, her parents didn't mind either way. It seems like she's a carefree spender, and her folks just want her out of the house as soon as possible. We'll cover her tuition today, but after that, she's your responsibility. So anything other than her education isn't our concern, they said casually, not wanting to bother with rent. The newlyweds chose to stay with our parents. Thankfully, our dad, who used to be well off, owned a spacious old house. With enough space, it wasn't a big deal for them to live together. My dad grew up in a wealthy family, so he never faced money troubles like a regular worker. He hardly shared his thoughts, always wearing a smile and seeming a bit out of touch with reality. Mom often guided him, but I never saw him lose his temper. "I got a talking to from your mom again," he'd say with a chuckle. Dad was easygoing, taking everything in stride, which is probably why he and Mom got along so well. I adored Dad. He'd just laugh along when Mom scolded him. And so began the living arrangement with a newly married couple. My sister-in-law doesn't lift a finger around the house. She doesn't even bother with the vacuum or sorting her laundry from ours. Cooking? Forget about it. She waits for Mom or me to make meals. "You could pitch in a bit, you know." I finally snapped, only to be accused of picking on her. "You're intimidating, sis. Maybe that's why you're still single at your age," she quipped, giggling. My brother just joins in her laughter. "At least do your own laundry. Isn't it embarrassing to have someone else wash your underwear, sis?" I thought we were all one big happy family. She'd fake tears for sympathy. My brother always took her side in moments like these. "Sophie, just because Emily is young and cute, don't get jealous and bully her. We're not here to be your servants. Living together means following some rules. Emily's a student, her main focus should be on her studies. We're family, so we should be able to cooperate, right?" He said this without any hint of remorse. Even though Mom suggested they get their own place and help us with rent, he brushed it off. "If we move out, it has to be a fancy apartment. We can't settle for something cheap," such selfishness. When I asked Dad to intervene, all he'd say is, "It's tough for just the two of them to manage. They're still young." And because of that, my brother and his wife felt even bolder. When I hit 30, I got engaged, and it was a stroke of luck. My future husband was a client from work, and we hit it off during meetings. He was thoughtful and kind, so when he asked me out and then proposed, I was over the moon. Finally tying the knot, surprised someone would want you. "Better make sure you don't mess it up," my brother remarked. "Glad you found a buyer. Can't wait for the busybody sister-in-law to be out of our hair." My parents chimed in, blessing our union wholeheartedly. I'd visit my parents occasionally, but my brother and his wife hadn't changed. She graduated the next year but didn't work or help around the house. When I tried to advise her, I was told I was a stranger now and shouldn't meddle. But I had a feeling they weren't leaving because they wanted to keep hold of the family assets. Deep down, they were probably relieved they didn't have to share them with me, now that I was married and gone. However, leaving doesn't mean I forfeited my rights to inherit. My brother and his wife probably understand this, but now that I'm not around, they might feel they can do as they please. When the time comes, I'd gladly give up my inheritance if they take good care of our parents and the house. But for now, I don't see any signs of that happening. About 2 years later, my father's health deteriorated, and he was in and out of the hospital. I pitched in with his care, visiting him as often as I could, but my brother and his wife seemed unconcerned. My father started mentioning his $20 million inheritance, and every time I visited, I noticed my sister-in-law sweet-talking on my father's side, saying, "Hey sis, I'd love to help out too, but Mom handles everything, and I never get the chance." "But you never showed interest in that before, did you?" "That's not entirely true, but don't you think Mom might be trying to keep us out of the loop to control the inheritance? Our parents are really close, and I think Mom wants to handle everything herself. I don't think she's thinking about it that way. Really? So you believe we'll get a fair share when Dad passes? Stop it. Don't talk about such unlucky things. Dad's still with us. I'm really frustrated with my brother and his wife, who seem to only care about money. But it's unclear if my father actually has that much wealth. While her family used to be well off, my father is just a regular salaryman. I can't imagine he has that much saved up. A year later, my father passed away. I hurried to the hospital as soon as I heard his condition had worsened suddenly, but when I arrived, he was already gone. The only solace was seeing how peaceful his face looked. I'm sure he was smiling, being looked after by Mom until the end. You're smiling, right, Dad? You were carefree till the very end. My husband left work early to join me, but my brother and his wife didn't show up at the hospital. When I reached out to my brother, he calmly responded, "If he's already gone, what's the point of rushing there?" My brother and his wife didn't seem to be grieving at the funeral. They were laughing and chatting. Right after the funeral, my brother wasted no time bringing up the topic of inheritance. As a couple, we'll inherit the $20 million from Dad. What? What do you mean? Did both you and Mom give up your shares? Can't we discuss this after the 49th day memorial? The funeral just happened today. Normally, it's better to settle financial matters later. We live in his house as a couple, and I'm the eldest son, so the inheritance is rightfully ours. Bringing this up right after Dad's passing didn't sit well with me. I didn't particularly care about the money, but it angered me that my brother assumed I'd agree with him. Fine, but in return you better take good care of Mom. Who would believe such words? My mother spoke before I could object. It's fine, dear. Arguing about this won't do any good, especially now. But Dad had just passed and Mom was clearly feeling down. I couldn't just let it slide. This isn't something to decide right now. Let's head home for today, my husband, who had been quietly listening, intervened. I held back until now, but my husband couldn't stand it any longer. That's when we decided to leave. It doesn't feel right, especially after Dad's passing. I understand your feelings, but right now, I'm more worried about your mom. She's usually so strong, but she seems really down. I'm really worried about her too. I couldn't help but wonder why Mom agreed with my brother's stance so easily. Was she swayed by him and his wife? Mom and Dad were always a strong couple. Losing Dad must have hit her hard. Honestly, I'd rather be reminiscing about Dad right now. But my anger towards my brother is clouding everything. Since then, my brother and his wife kept bringing up renouncing the inheritance, but I refused to discuss it until after the 49th day. When the time came, they wasted no time bringing it up again. But once more, Mom urged me to give it up. If Mom says it's okay, then it must be okay, right? Are you sure about this? Won't you regret it later on? After all, Emily is Dad's daughter, so don't worry. Well, yeah, she's your wife. That's not what I meant. I meant she has a right to inherit. At this point, Emily's practically been adopted by our parents. What? I was stunned. When I glanced at Mom, she simply nodded. Adoption by in-laws isn't exactly unheard of, right? It's not common for a bride to be adopted, especially not a son-in-law. If Emily inherits, we'll pay less in inheritance tax than if I were the sole heir. I was shocked that he had thought about it so deeply, wondering when he started planning this. Even more surprising was that Mom agreed. And then they asked me to renounce the inheritance. Maybe Mom, being a mother now that Dad's gone, was worried about the future. But if it's Mom's decision, I suppose I can't argue. So I decided to send in the inheritance renunciation document. I don't want to argue about money anymore. Luckily, my husband isn't one to fuss over it, and he trusts me to make the decision about the inheritance. If renouncing it means Mom can live peacefully from now on, then it's the best choice. About a month later, my sister-in-law called me. It looks like your mom is losing her memory. What? But she's always been so tidy. The house must be a disaster if she's not cleaning. It was hard to believe my mom, who was usually meticulous about cleanliness, could leave laundry lying around and not bother to clean. And after she's just eaten, she yells at me, "I'm hungry. Are you trying to starve me? Can you imagine?" And I'm the one cooking for her. She's turned into a completely different person. Is it true? Have you taken her to the hospital? It seems unbelievable. She gets aggressive when I try to get her out, and it's embarrassing to be seen with her in public. Sam thinks I should just let her be, but I'm the one dealing with her all day and I'm at my wit's end. Honestly, I'm tired of it. So I decided to stop by my parents' house on my way home from work. I was speechless at the sight of my mother, who looked unrecognizable. She was sitting on her bed in dirty pajamas, hair unkempt, with vacant eyes. It's only been a month, but she's changed so much. It's clear she's not herself. Mom, you know who I am, right? What's happened to you? Who are you? My mother asked, tilting her head. This can't be real. I mean, look at her. She should be sitting, right? What's happening? And the room is a mess. How did it get this bad? Well, I don't know about all that, but you guys promised to look after Mom, didn't you? Taking care of an elderly woman isn't part of the agreement. There's no written contract when it comes to caring for parents. What are you talking about? In that case, dear sister-in-law, it's your turn to take care of her. I was going to do that without being asked. Let's go home, Mom, I said, attempting to lead her. But she stubbornly resisted. She wouldn't budge, shaking off my hand. Even when I tried to pull her, she clung to the bed, refusing to move. What's happened to you, Mom? I had no choice but to back off that day. Even when my husband and I returned the next day to fetch her, she still adamantly refused to move. I want to be with your father, she cried. It was hard to believe my mother had become like this. I have a job and can't visit her every day. That's why I want her to come to my house. But she refused to leave her old home. Sometime later, I received a call from my younger brother. Sis, we've moved. Really? Where to? Did you take Mom with you? I wouldn't drag around an elderly woman. She's just a burden. Sam, what's wrong with you? Mom mentioned Dad's valuable securities are in the safe deposit box. If we sell the house, we'll get around $20 million. What? It'll be a problem if Mom stays in that house forever. So sis, get Mom out of there as soon as possible. I'm relying on you. Wait, hold on. What are you saying? So that's the situation. Please take care of mother-in-law. As soon as my sister-in-law, who seemed to have taken over my brother's role, made that statement, the phone abruptly went dead. Despite repeatedly dialing, they didn't pick up. I left work early and rushed to my parents' house to persuade my mother to come to my place. I anticipated her usual resistance, but this time she quietly agreed, which was a relief. It seemed like Mom understood that nobody was staying in that house anymore. She remained silent during the drive home. But when we arrived, she suddenly perked up. Huh? Can I use your bathroom? She asked and hurried inside. I was perplexed and stood there, trying to make sense of it. The mother I just saw was unmistakably the same as before. What in the world is going on? I felt like I'd been struck by lightning. When my mother emerged from the bath, she requested some clothes. I quickly fetched her some of my own and a fresh set of underwear I bought for her. Ah, I feel so refreshed, she exclaimed with a bright smile, drying her hair with a towel. Mom, what's happening? I asked, just as my husband walked in. Like me, he looked stunned at the sight of my mother. Suddenly, my mother burst into laughter. That was quite the performance, wasn't it? I used to be in the drama club in high school. They say, to deceive the enemy, you must first deceive your allies, and it seems to be true, doesn't it? So it turned out my mother was feigning senility. But why? I couldn't make sense of any of it. Just wait and see. That couple will do something worse soon. By that couple, do you mean Sam and his wife? Exactly. That couple's relationship is solely built on money. Then my mother proceeded to fill us in on what had transpired. Both my husband and I were amazed by my mother's cunning. The following week, my brother called, furious. Hey sis, you knew about this and didn't say anything, did you? What's going on? What are you suddenly talking about? There's no inheritance from Dad at all. When I checked the safety deposit box Mom mentioned, there were only loan agreements inside. So remember that $20 million? Well, that's actually a $20 million debt. Did you not bother to check? Typical of you, the only son in our family to inherit all of Dad's debts. Well, technically, that's still part of the inheritance. In the past, Dad, being too trusting, had acted as a guarantor for a friend's business without Mom's knowledge. The business failed, and the friend kept borrowing from Dad until it went bankrupt, leaving behind only the debt. And to make matters worse, the friend disappeared without a trace. It turns out that our family home had been put up as collateral due to the debt incurred back then. This might have even contributed to Dad developing dementia. It was only then that Mom found out about it. Dad kept saying there's a $20 million inheritance. Dad's words led my younger brother to mistakenly believe there was a hefty cash inheritance. So he and his wife decided to move in with our parents to seize as much money as possible. Dad, without suspecting anything, agreed to my brother's plan. But Mom saw through my brother's scheme and chose not to object. She knew he was so eager for the inheritance that she could simply hand it over to him. To shield Dad's dementia, Mom deliberately kept my brother and his wife away from him. And after Dad's passing, when my brother and his wife finally showed their true intentions, Mom pretended not to notice to observe their reaction. She bided her time for the right moment. Then I'll renounce the inheritance too. It's too late for that. Did you know you can only renounce an inheritance within 3 months of learning about it? We're well past that period now, so you two will have to shoulder the debt together. Mom had been waiting for this moment. She feigned senility until the deadline for renouncing the inheritance had passed. My brother's only goal in living with Mom was to extract information about Dad's inheritance. When the time came, Mom casually mentioned the safety deposit box as if it had just occurred to her. With the information they needed, my brother and his wife swiftly left the house. All along, they had been playing into Mom's hands. Emily is threatening divorce if she doesn't get any money. But legally, she's Dad's child, so she can't escape the debt even with a divorce, right? I see, but I quit my job, thinking I could live a life of luxury with $20 million. But I don't have that kind of money. Oh dear, you've really gotten yourself into a mess, haven't you? So, naturally you'll help me out, right? Why should I help you? You're the one who pushed Mom and me to renounce the inheritance, so I shouldn't be involved anymore. Well, thanks to you, I'm in this mess. I'm sure Dad is crying tears of joy to have such a dutiful son. Good luck paying back the debt. The family home was seized due to the mortgage, leaving the land and house, worth nearly $720,000, insufficient to cover the debt. My brother and his wife struggled to make repayments while their marriage suffered under the strain of financial stress. As Mom predicted, they eventually divorced, consumed by constant money disputes. Mom agreed to dissolve the adoption, making Emily a stranger to us. She likely hoped this would absolve her of the debt, but reality is unforgiving. Despite the dissolution, Emily still inherited the debt from her father's passing. You deceived me. My sister-in-law stormed in, her anger palpable. However, we hadn't intended to deceive her. Mom was heartbroken to see my brother and his wife happily calculating money instead of mourning their father's death. She remained silent, overwhelmed by their greed. Their behavior served as a cautionary tale of the consequences of unchecked greed. Afterward, my brother continued to pester us for money, prompting us to relocate without informing him. To my surprise, I discovered that Dad had taken out a substantial life insurance policy with Mom and me as beneficiaries. Despite his passing, he had diligently kept up with the premiums. The fact that my brother wasn't listed as a beneficiary left me questioning whether Dad had been aware of the situation all along. Despite his seemingly carefree demeanor, perhaps the true strategist in our family wasn't Mom, but Dad. He had once murmured, "There's a $20 million inheritance. Whether intentional or not, I can't say for certain now. My husband and I used the insurance payout as a down payment on a new home." Meanwhile, my brother and his ex-wife seemed to be working while dealing with pressure from loan sharks. Their troubles were no longer my concern. Even after our move, my brother persisted in contacting us, demanding to know our whereabouts. That's when I mentioned the insurance money. "You renounced the inheritance, so that money should be mine," he shouted. However, inheritance renouncement and life insurance are distinct matters. Unlike inheritance, life insurance payouts go directly to the named beneficiary. I explained this to him and promptly blocked my brother and former sister-in-law's contact details. Now we're enjoying a peaceful life as a family of 3. Mom is thriving both physically and mentally, the epitome of good health. My husband and I pray that she continues to live a long and fulfilling life.
My name is Rebecca, and I'm an artist. Not the kind you see in fancy galleries, but the kind who spends her days in a modest charity center, painting with kids who've seen more than they should. I've always believed that art can heal, and every day I see it happen with these children. I live with my husband, Mark, a sales manager who's always chasing the next big deal, and his mother, Martha, who's never seen a reason to hold back her opinion. Our home is a constant buzz of Mark's phone calls and Martha's TV shows. It's not easy, but it's life. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, I decided to share some exciting news. Mark, Martha, I entered some of my paintings and the kids' artwork in a city contest. The prize is $100,000. Mark, scrolling through his phone, didn't even look up. That's nice, Rebecca, but let's be real. What are the chances? Martha snorted. With those street kids' drawings? You're dreaming, dear. I tried to explain. It's not just about the prize. It's about showing what these kids can do, how they express their... Mark cut me off. Rebecca, why don't you find a real job? Something that actually pays? I sighed, looking at my half-chopped vegetables. It's important to me, Mark. This job, these kids, they matter. Moreover, my salary at the center is quite enough to pay bills and food. Martha waved a dismissive hand. We need real money, Rebecca, not child's play. I finished dinner in silence. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and disappointment. I believed in my dream, in the magic of art, and maybe, just maybe, the contest could be a new beginning. But at home, it felt like my dreams were nothing but whispers in a storm. I closed my eyes, picturing the colorful, chaotic art room at the center, the place where my heart felt fullest. Tomorrow, I'd go back there, to my little haven of paints and smiles, away from the doubts and the cold reality of my home life. This contest, it was more than a chance for money. It was a chance to prove to myself, and maybe to Mark and Martha, that what I do is valuable, that it has the power to change lives. And with that thought, I drifted off to sleep, dreaming of vibrant colors and the sound of children's laughter. Each day at the Charity Center was a journey into a world where paint and canvas became tools of transformation. There, surrounded by children who had seen the darker side of life, I found my purpose. We painted murals together, walls turned into vibrant stories of hope, each brushstroke a testament to their resilience. I remember one afternoon, a shy little boy, Timmy, who had never picked up a brush before, created a bright sun with rays stretching across the wall. His smile, as he stepped back to admire his work, was brighter than the sun he'd painted. Moments like these were my daily reminders of why I did what I did. But at home, the story was starkly different. One evening, I returned home, still carrying the joy of the day's achievements. Eager to share, I approached Mark and Martha in the living room. Mark, look at this, I said, showing him a picture of the mural. Timmy painted this sun. He's never drawn anything before. Mark glanced at the photo and then back at his phone. That's nice, but it's just a drawing, Rebecca. Kids doodle all the time. Frustration welled up inside me. It's not just a doodle, Mark. It's a big step for him. He's been through so much. Martha cut in sharply. Rebecca, when will you stop playing therapist with paint? It's a child's drawing, nothing more. You need to start living in the real world. Her words felt like a slap. It's not just playing, Martha. These kids, they find a voice through their art. It's healing for them. Mark let out an exasperated sigh. Healing? What about our mortgage, Rebecca? Your healing isn't going to cover it. You need a real job. I clenched my fists, trying to control the rising tide of anger and hurt. This is a real job, Mark. It's making a difference. Martha snorted. Difference? What difference does it make when I'm ashamed to tell my friends where you work? You need to wake up and see reality, Rebecca. I stood there, words failing me. The gap between my world at the center and my world at home had never felt so vast. In one, I was helping to rebuild lives. In the other, I was constantly reminded of my supposed inadequacy. That night, in the solitude of my studio, I stared at the blank canvas. The harsh words from earlier echoed in my mind, drowning out the laughter and joy of the day. I picked up my brush, and with each stroke, I tried to paint away the hurt, the doubt, and the feeling of being undervalued. The day was winding down at the Charity Center, the walls echoing with the lingering laughter of children. I was cleaning up the paints when my phone rang, displaying an unfamiliar number. Hello, Rebecca Thompson speaking, I answered. Miss Thompson, This is John Harris from the City Arts Council. Congratulations, you've won our citywide art contest. The prize is $100,000. We'll be in touch soon for further details and discuss an additional opportunity to collaborate with the city. The news hit me like a wave. I won? My voice trembled with a mix of shock and joy. Yes, indeed. Your and the children's work truly stood out, John replied, his voice warm with genuine admiration. I thanked him profusely and hung up, my heart racing. This was beyond my wildest dreams, a validation of our efforts, of the children's talent, and in some way of my own. I shared the news with the children, and their reaction was heartwarming. Their cheers and claps filled the room with an energy that was almost tangible. This was our collective victory. Later, as the center quieted down, I sat with Lisa, the psychologist, over a cup of tea. I shared my apprehensions about breaking the news at home. Mark and his mother have never really seen the value in what I do. They might just see the money, I confided. Lisa leaned forward, her eyes thoughtful. Why not test their reaction? See if this win changes their attitude. It might reveal their true colors. Her suggestion struck a chord. At home, my work had always been trivialized, its impact constantly undermined. This win, this significant recognition, could indeed be the litmus test for their genuine sentiments. I pondered over Lisa's advice as I made my way home. The idea was both unsettling and necessary. If the money swayed their attitudes, it would uncover the uncomfortable truth about their regard for me and my work. Stepping into the house that evening, I decided to hold off on sharing the news just yet. I wanted to observe, to plan my approach carefully. Lisa's words echoed in my mind, and I knew she was right. It was time to find out the truth, however uncomfortable it might be. I went to bed that night with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. I was sure of Mark's love, or at least I wanted to be. But Lisa's proposal was an opportunity to see beyond my hopes, to understand the reality of my home life. I agreed with her. It was a test worth taking. That evening, I decided it was time to put my plan into action. Sitting at the dinner table with Mark and Martha, I took a deep breath and said, I have something to tell you. I won the city art contest. The prize is $100,000. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Mark's fork dropped to his plate with a clatter, and Martha's eyes widened in disbelief. $100,000? Rebecca, that's incredible, Mark exclaimed, his usual indifference replaced by a surprising enthusiasm. Martha, who had always been quick with a critical word about my job, suddenly softened. Dear, that's wonderful news. We're so proud of you, she said, her tone unusually warm. During the meal, Martha fussed over me more than she ever had, offering me the best pieces of chicken and constantly refilling my glass. Mark, too, was uncharacteristically attentive, asking about my artwork and the contest in detail. Their newfound affection was overwhelming, almost suffocating. I noticed them exchanging glances, a silent communication that I couldn't decipher. It was as if a switch had been flipped, and the usual cold, dismissive atmosphere had transformed into one of exaggerated warmth and interest. Later that evening, I stepped out of my room to get a glass of water and overheard a hushed conversation coming from the living room. Curiosity got the better of me, and I quietly moved closer. We can finally redo the kitchen like we wanted, I heard Martha say in a hushed tone. And get that new car. We deserve it after all, Mark added, his voice laced with greed. There was a pause before Martha spoke again. Once we have the money, we can think about... Well, Rebecca doesn't really need to stay here anymore, does she? My heart sank as I listened. Their words were like daggers, revealing their true intentions. The affectionate dinner wasn't for me. It was for the money. They were already planning to spend my winnings on themselves and even discussing getting rid of me. I quietly retreated to my room, their words echoing in my ears. The test had revealed their true colors, and they were darker than I had imagined. I lay in bed, a mix of hurt and clarity washing over me. This was not the love and support of a family. It was opportunism, plain and simple. As I closed my eyes, the weight of their betrayal pressed heavily on my heart. The truth was out, and now I had to decide what to do with it. The morning air was tense as I sat down for breakfast with Mark and Martha. The news I was about to break would surely stir the pot, but I was determined to see it through. Casually, I started, "I've decided what to do with the contest money." They both perked up, leaning in with a keen interest that had been absent before. "I'm donating the entire $100,000 to the charity center," I said, watching their faces for reaction. The response was immediate and explosive. "What?" Mark slammed his hand on the table, his face red with anger. "Are you out of your mind, Rebecca?" Martha's voice was shrill, filled with disbelief and outrage. "You're giving away our ticket to a comfortable life? You foolish girl!" I remained calm, though their words stung. "It's not our money. It's mine, and those kids need it more than we do." Mark's voice was laced with scorn. "This is the most idiotic thing I've ever heard. You're a fool, Rebecca." Martha's anger bubbled over, her words harsh and unfiltered. "You've always been a disgrace, pretending to be some saint with those street kids. And now this? Throwing away a fortune?" I tried to explain. "It's not throwing it away. It's helping children who have nothing." But Mark was relentless. "It's not just about the money. You've always been this way, naive and foolish. I should have seen it sooner. I was planning to wait, spend the money first, but now? Now I want a divorce, Rebecca. I can't be with someone who throws away opportunities like this." His words cut through me, but they also brought clarity. This was the reality of our marriage, stripped of any pretense. I looked at them both, my decision firm. If that's how you feel, then it's clear to me now. This marriage, this relationship, was never about us. It was about convenience, about money. Without another word, I stood up and walked away from the table, away from the vitriol and greed. Their shouts and insults followed me, but they no longer had the power to hurt me. I had seen the truth, and it had set me free. The days following my announcement were cold and quiet. The house felt more like a battleground than a home. Mark and Martha avoided me, their disappointment and anger hanging in the air like a thick fog. I was packing some of my belongings in the bedroom when Mark walked in. His face was hard, his eyes void of the warmth I once knew. "So, you're really doing this? Throwing away our life for some charity?" he asked, his voice edged with bitterness. "I'm not throwing away our life, Mark. I'm choosing to do what's right with my money," I replied, folding a sweater into my suitcase. He let out a harsh laugh. "Your money? It was supposed to be our ticket out of here, Rebecca, and you just gave it away like it was nothing." "It was never about the money for me, Mark. It's about helping those kids, something you never understood." His frustration boiled over. "You're so blinded by your so-called mission that you can't see the real world. You're a dreamer, Rebecca, and dreamers don't survive." I zipped up my suitcase, feeling the finality of the moment. Maybe that's the difference between us, Mark. I dream of making a difference, while you dream of money. Mark's face tightened. "You know what, Rebecca? Maybe it's better this way. I can't be with someone who doesn't see reality. I want a divorce." The words stung, but they didn't surprise me. "If that's what you want, Mark." He turned to leave, then stopped. "You were always a fool, Rebecca. I just didn't see it until now." After he left the room, I sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of his words sinking in. The love I thought we had was overshadowed by greed and misunderstanding. As I carried my suitcase downstairs, Martha didn't even look at me. Her disdain was clear, her silence louder than any words. Stepping out of the house, I felt a sense of relief mixed with sorrow. The chapter of my life with Mark and Martha had closed, but ahead of me was a path of my own making. I got into the taxi, glancing back at the house one last time. This wasn't just an end, it was a beginning of a life where I could be true to myself and my dreams, free from the chains of greed and misunderstanding. The day to sign the divorce papers arrived with a mix of relief and finality. I walked into the lawyer's office, feeling a sense of purpose. Mark was there, and to my surprise, Martha accompanied him. Their presence together was a stark reminder of the life I was leaving behind. As we sat down, Martha didn't waste any time. "You're making a huge mistake, Rebecca. Throwing away a marriage over some charity money," she hissed, her tone laced with disdain. "And how do you plan to survive? With your tiny salary? You can't even afford a decent place to live, she continued, her words sharp and biting. Mark sat silently, casting contemptuous glances at me. I listened to Martha's tirade, feeling a strange detachment. Their words no longer had the power to hurt me. Once the paperwork was done and it was time to leave, I turned to them, a smile playing on my lips. You know, I was just testing you, I said, their confused looks fueling my confidence. Testing us? Mark echoed, puzzled. Yes, I wanted to see how you'd react if I said I was donating all the money, and you both showed your true colors. Martha's face contorted in confusion. What are you saying? I'm not giving all the money to charity. That was a lie. And the city? They've given me several lucrative projects. I'm going to be just fine, I said, the satisfaction of revealing the truth making my words strong and clear. The color drained from Mark's face, and Martha's mouth hung open in shock. Their reaction was everything I had expected and more. Mark suddenly found his voice, desperation seeping through. Rebecca, please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean any of it. Can we start over? I looked at him, once my husband, now a stranger begging for a second chance. No, Mark, we can't. You showed me who you really are, and I have no desire to be with someone like that. Turning to Martha, I added, and you, Martha, should know that money isn't everything. What I do, my work, it matters more than any luxury you crave. Without another word, I walked out of the office, leaving them behind in their shock and disbelief. I walked into the sunlight, feeling lighter and more confident than I had in years. The divorce was the end of a painful chapter, but it was also the beginning of something new. A chapter where I was the author of my own story, unburdened by others' greed and deception. It was a freedom hard-earned and well-deserved. The months following my separation from Mark and Martha unfolded like a series of vibrant brushstrokes on a once blank canvas. I found myself immersed in a new rhythm of life, one that echoed with the sounds of children's laughter at the charity center and the quiet concentration of my work on city projects. My world, once confined to the expectations and criticisms of a household that didn't understand me, had expanded into a realm where my passion for art and my dedication to helping others were not just acknowledged, but celebrated. I had rented a small apartment in a quaint part of town. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine, a sanctuary where the walls were adorned with my paintings and the cheerful artwork of the children from the center. Each piece told a story, a reminder of the journey I had embarked on and the lives that had intertwined with mine. The decision to donate half of my prize money to the charity center had set a series of unexpected events in motion. The local newspapers and community blogs picked up the story, intrigued by the artist who chose charity over personal gain. My phone began ringing with inquiries and offers. Local gallery owners, once indifferent, were now eager to showcase my work. My paintings, which had been a source of solace in my darkest times, were now being admired in well-lit galleries, appreciated by people who saw in them the same hope and beauty that I did. The city projects, too, brought a newfound recognition. I was commissioned to design murals for public spaces, transforming bland walls into tapestries of color and life. Each project was a new adventure, an opportunity to leave a mark on the city that had become my larger canvas. In the midst of this newfound success, I occasionally received messages from Mark. His texts, laden with apologies and pleas for a second chance, were a stark reminder of the life I had left behind. I read them, sometimes with a mocking smile, but mostly with a sense of detachment. The pain he had caused was a part of my past, a chapter that had closed the day I walked out of that house. His words, once capable of cutting me deeply, now seemed superficial, like ripples on the surface of a lake that could not disturb its depths. Evenings in my apartment were a time of reflection and creativity. I would often sit by the window, a cup of tea in hand, looking out at the city lights, thinking about the twists and turns my life had taken. The betrayal and hurt had been a crucible, burning away the illusions and leaving behind a clarity of purpose. I realized I had found strength in my vulnerability, courage in facing the unknown, and an unshakable belief in the power of art to heal and transform. On weekends, I conducted art workshops at the charity center. The children, each with their own story of resilience, continued to be my greatest inspiration. We painted together, our collective imagination turning blank canvases into expressions of joy, pain, and hope. I saw in their eyes the reflection of my own journey, a testament to the healing power of art. As the city embraced my work, my personal life, too, began to flourish in new ways. I made friends in the art community, a group of eclectic and supportive individuals who appreciated me for who I was. We shared stories, laughed, and dreamed together. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of belonging. One evening, as I finished a painting for an upcoming exhibition, I stepped back to take it all in. The vibrant colors on the canvas, the sense of accomplishment, the peace that filled my heart. It was a far cry from the days of doubt and belittlement. I had emerged from the shadows of a stifling relationship into the light of self-discovery and fulfillment. As I closed the lights that night and settled into bed, I thought about the future. It was unwritten, full of unknowns, but I was no longer afraid. I had weathered the storm and found my rainbow on the other side. My story was one of transformation, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, there is the potential for a masterpiece, and I was just getting started.
Hi, I'm Laura. If you peeked into my life, you'd probably find me buried in code, working remotely from my cozy little apartment. It's just me, my laptop, and the comforting hum of my routine. I'm not one for crowds or big social scenes. But Anna, my best and only friend since college, she's the complete opposite. She's this whirlwind of energy, always surrounded by friends, and happily married to Tom, who's as chatty and friendly as they come. Every time we meet, Anna has this thing about pushing me to date. "Laura, you're not getting any younger," she'd say in her half-joking, half-serious tone. "You need someone in your life other than your computer." I'd usually brush it off with a laugh, not really taking her seriously. But one evening, as we were lounging at her place, she was more persistent than usual. "I've got the perfect guy for you," she announced, her eyes lighting up with excitement. "His name's Chris, a family friend. You two would be great together." I remember twirling my spoon in my coffee, feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Blind dates aren't really my style, Anna. They're always so awkward," I protested. Anna leaned in, her smile persuasive. "It's not a blind date, silly. We'll have dinner here, just the four of us. It'll be casual, no pressure." So, there I was, giving in to her plan. The night I met Chris at Anna's place, my stomach was a knot of nerves. But Chris, he was surprisingly easy to talk to. Kind of reserved, but with a genuine smile that made me feel more at ease. We all chatted in Anna's living room, the conversation flowing smoothly until Tom, out of the blue, brought up their struggles with fertility. "We're trying for a baby, but it's been hard," he said, and I could see the hope mixed with worry in his eyes. I nodded, feeling a bit out of my depth with such a personal topic. "I hope it works out for you guys," I said, and meant it. After that night, Chris and I started seeing each other. It wasn't like those dramatic love stories you read about. It was more comfortable. He was a good listener, and we shared a lot of the same interests. Before I even knew how it happened, we were dating. I remember thinking, as I fell asleep one night after one of our dates, that having someone else around isn't so bad. Not so bad at all. 6 months had flown by, and there I was, in a simple yet elegant white dress, saying, "I do" to Chris. It felt surreal, standing there with him, Anna intently watching us, her belly now showing a growing life inside. Tom was beaming, taking photos like a man on a mission. The first months of our marriage felt like living in a dream. Chris was everything I'd hoped for in a partner, attentive, caring, always making me laugh with his subtle humor. We'd have these quiet evenings, just the two of us, and I cherished every moment. But as time passed, I noticed changes. Small at first, like Chris coming home late more often. "Work's been crazy," he'd say, kissing me on the forehead before heading to the shower. One evening, while Chris was working late again, I called Anna. Hey, it's me. Chris has been really busy with work lately. Is this normal after getting married? Anna's voice crackled through the phone. Totally normal, Laura. Tom was like that too. Men and their work, you know? I wanted to believe her, but something felt off. Chris was home less and less, and when he was, there was this distance, like he was there but not really with me. We stopped having those quiet evenings. It was like living with a ghost. One night when he came home late again, I couldn't hold it in anymore. Chris, we need to talk. You've been so distant lately. Is everything okay? He just shrugged, avoiding eye contact. It's just work, Laura. You wouldn't understand. It's really busy right now. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was what marriage was supposed to be like. The silence in the house felt heavy, suffocating. I missed our talks, our laughs, the way he used to look at me. The next morning, I called Anna, hoping for some reassurance. Anna, I don't know what to do. It's like Chris is a different person. Laura, give it time. He's just adjusting to married life. It's a phase. It'll pass, Anna said. But her words didn't comfort me like they used to. I hung up, feeling more alone than ever. Was this just a phase, or was I losing the man I married? The uncertainty was the hardest part, like walking in the dark, not knowing where the path was leading. The more Chris stayed out late, the more the silence in our house seemed to echo with unanswered questions. Working late again, he'd say, his excuses sounding more and more like a rehearsed script. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, the unease growing inside me like a thorny vine. Desperate for some advice, I called Anna. I could hear the faint cries of her baby in the background. Anna, I'm worried about Chris. He's always out late. It doesn't feel right, I said, my voice tinged with concern. Anna's response was quick, almost dismissive. Oh, Laura, you're just being paranoid. I'm too busy with the baby to think about such things. Tom was the same when we first got married. It's normal, she said, the sound of her baby feeding interrupting our conversation. Her words did little to soothe me. If anything, they made me feel more alone, my concerns brushed off as mere paranoia. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. So, I decided to take a drastic step. Using my programming skills, I put together a small spyware program. I knew it was a violation of trust, but the need for truth overpowered my guilt. I installed it on Chris's phone, telling myself it was just to put my mind at ease. The first time I logged into the program, my heart pounded in my chest. The screen showed a map with Chris's location, a hotel in the city, nowhere near his office. As the days passed, the pattern became clear. Different hotels, always in the evenings. My stomach churned with each new revelation. But nothing prepared me for what I found next. The program allowed me to see his messages. I hesitated, knowing this was crossing a line, but I had to know. The chat window opened, and there it was, a stream of messages between Chris and someone else. Not just anyone, but Anna, my best friend. Their words were intimate, a stark contrast to the distant, almost formal way he spoke to me. I sat there, my whole body numb, as I read their plans, their laughter at my expense, the betrayal laid bare in pixels on my screen. The truth about my husband and my best friend, the two people I trusted most, was right in front of me, and it hit me with the force of a tidal wave. Chris married me in order to provide an alibi for himself. Now he can be near his mistress more often, hiding behind the fact that he is married to me. Unbelievable. We often don't see what's happening right under our noses, blinded by trust or maybe a refusal to acknowledge the possibility of betrayal. But there it was, in black and white. My world, as I knew it, had just crumbled. The nights became longer, each one stretching out like a dark, endless road as I sat alone, staring at my computer screen. The glow illuminated pages of messages between Chris and Anna, a window into a betrayal so deep it felt like drowning. Each message I read twisted the knife a little deeper. Chris's words about me were cruel and mocking. "Laura's so clueless. It's almost funny," he wrote in one message. "And Anna," she laughed along, adding her own jabs. "Yeah, she's weirdly naive. It's like playing a game with a child." Their laughter at our expense wasn't the worst of it, though. They planned their secret rendezvous with a casualness that made my stomach churn. "How about the Hilton this Thursday?" Chris would suggest. "Perfect, can't wait," Anna would reply, as if they were planning a simple coffee meeting. But one message stopped me cold, a revelation that felt like a physical blow. It was Anna talking about her newborn, Tom's supposed child. "The best part is Tom thinks he's the father," she wrote with a twisted pride. Chris's reply was a heartless confirmation. "Our little secret. He's none the wiser." It wasn't just an affair. It was a double betrayal, the depth of which was unimaginable. The evidence of their deceit wasn't just in the messages on my screen. It was lying in a crib, gurgling and cooing, oblivious to the web of lies surrounding its existence. I sat there, numb, the reality sinking in. My husband, the man I had vowed to spend my life with, was not only unfaithful, but a father to my best friend's child. And Anna, the friend I had trusted with my deepest fears and happiest moments, was a willing participant in this cruel game. As the night wore on, the silence of the house enveloped me. It was no longer a home, but a stage for a tragedy I never saw coming. The betrayal was not just of the heart. It was a betrayal of every moment we had shared, every laugh, every secret. And at the center of it all was a child, an innocent life caught in the crossfire of selfish desires. I realized then that the most profound wounds are often inflicted by those closest to us. And the evidence of this betrayal was now lying innocently in a crib, a living reminder of the lies and deceit that had shattered my world. The morning after I discovered the truth about Chris and Anna, I felt like I was in a daze. My apartment, once a haven, now felt like a cage trapping me with my betrayal. I knew what I had to do. Tom deserved to know the truth as much as I did. I picked up my phone, my heart pounding. Dialing Tom's number felt like stepping off a cliff. "Tom, it's Laura. We need to talk. It's about Anna and Chris." Tom's usually cheerful voice was laced with concern. "Laura, what's going on? You sound serious." I took a deep breath, my voice shaky. "It's bad, Tom. Can we meet somewhere private? There's something you need to see." We met at a quiet cafe, away from the places where our lives had crossed. Tom looked anxious as he sat down. "Okay, Laura, what's this all about? You're scaring me." I pushed the printouts of the messages across the table to him. "Tom, I'm sorry to drop this on you, but Chris and Anna, they've been having an affair." Tom's face went pale as he read the messages. His usual jovial demeanor vanished, replaced by a mix of anger and disbelief. This is bullshit. Anna wouldn't..." "And Chris?" His voice was a mix of rage and pain. "There's more," I said, the words feeling like lead in my mouth. "The baby. Chris might be the father." Tom looked like he had been slapped. He slammed his hand on the table, drawing stares. "That son of a... How could they do this? My own wife? My baby?" I could see the hurt in his eyes, raw and unfiltered. "I'm so sorry, Tom. I thought you should know. You deserved the truth." Tom ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration and disbelief. "I can't believe I've been such a fool. We need to do something, Laura. We can't let them get away with this." His words echoed my own thoughts. I agree. We need a plan. They've been playing us for fools, and it's time they faced the consequences. As we talked, our plan began to take shape. It wasn't just about confronting them. It was about exposing their lies, making them feel a fraction of the pain they'd caused us. We left the cafe with a sense of purpose, a bond formed through shared betrayal. As I drove home, the reality of what I was about to do settled in. This wasn't just about confronting a cheating spouse, it was about revenge. And my revenge would be cold, much colder than an iceberg. The day of the confrontation felt like walking into a storm. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears as I drove to Anna's house with Chris. He was clueless, humming along to the radio, while my hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. We walked into Anna's house, where Tom was already waiting. His face was a mask of calm, but his eyes were like flint. Anna greeted us, all smiles, unaware of the storm about to break. "Hey, everyone. So glad you could make it," Anna chirped, her voice grating on my nerves. Tom cut right to the chase. "I have something to share. A surprise." Anna's smile faltered. "A surprise? What kind of surprise?" Tom pulled out an envelope. "It's a DNA test. It says, 'I'm not the father of your baby, Anna.'" Anna's face drained of color. "What? Tom, why would you? That's ridiculous." Chris turned to me, confusion written all over his face. "Laura, what's going on?" I looked him straight in the eye, my voice steady. "Why don't you tell us, Chris, about you and Anna?" Anna's eyes darted between me and Tom, panic rising. "Laura, I don't know what you're talking about." Tom slammed his hand on the table, his voice rising. "Cut the crap, Anna. We know about the affair. We have the proof." Chris's face went from confused to pale. "Laura, it's not what you think." I threw the printouts of their messages on the table. "It's exactly what I think. How long, Chris? How long have you been lying to me?" Anna started to cry, her sobs dramatic. "It was a mistake. I'm so sorry." Tom's voice was like ice. "Sorry doesn't cut it, Anna. You've ruined everything." The room was thick with tension, a tangle of lies and betrayal finally laid bare. Chris tried to reach out to me, but I pulled away. "Don't touch me. You've betrayed me in the worst way." Anna was pleading now, looking at Tom. "Please, Tom. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." But Tom was unmoved. "Meaning doesn't change facts, Anna. It's over." I looked at Chris, my voice cold. "We're done, Chris. I want a divorce." The confrontation was brutal, the air heavy with the weight of broken trust and shattered relationships. As I walked out of Anna's house, I knew there was no going back. The truth had been revealed, and with it, the end of the life I thought I knew. After the confrontation, the drive home was a blur. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, sadness. It wasn't just the affair, it was the depth of the deceit that cut the deepest. The next day, I called Chris, needing to hear him say it. "Chris, we need to talk. You owe me that much." He agreed to meet, his voice resigned. We sat across from each other at our kitchen table, a battlefield of broken vows. "Start talking, Chris. I want to hear you say it," I demanded, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. Chris looked down, unable to meet my eyes. "It started as just a fling. I didn't mean for it to go this far." "A fling? You call destroying our marriage a fling?" My voice rose, tinged with anger and hurt. "I'm sorry, Laura. I never meant to hurt you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sorry doesn't undo the lies, Chris. It doesn't change anything," I snapped back. There was a pause, heavy with unsaid words. "What are you going to do?" he finally asked. "I want a divorce, and I'll be talking to a lawyer about compensation for this betrayal," I said, my resolve firm. Chris nodded, defeated. "I understand. I'll cooperate." The conversation with Anna was even harder. I called her, my former best friend, now the source of my deepest pain. "Anna, we need to talk," I said as soon as she picked up. "Laura, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." Anna's voice was shaky, filled with false remorse. "Save it, Anna. How could you do this to me? To Tom? To your own family?" I asked, my voice hard. I was selfish. I made a terrible mistake, she admitted. A mistake? You made a choice, Anna. And now you have to live with the consequences, I replied coldly. I know, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it right, she said, but her words felt empty. It's too late for that. Tom knows everything. You've lost him and you've lost me, I said, hanging up before she could respond. The aftermath was messy. Lawyers were involved, divorce papers were filed, and settlements discussed. But through it all, I held my head high. I was hurt, yes, but not broken. I realized that sometimes the hardest betrayals come from those we trust the most. But they also teach us the most valuable lessons about strength and self-respect. As the chapter of my life with Chris and Anna closed, I knew that I was walking away with something invaluable, my dignity and the knowledge that I was stronger than I ever knew. The day I signed the final divorce papers, it felt like I was signing off on the most painful chapter of my life. In the lawyer's office, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey. You're doing great, Laura. Most wouldn't have handled it as well as you have, my lawyer said, offering a sympathetic smile as he handed me the documents. Yeah, well, when life kicks you down, you kick back harder, I replied, trying to sound tougher than I felt. Leaving the office, the reality of my new life hit me. I was no longer part of a we, but just me, Laura, on my own. It was scary, but also a chance for a fresh start. I met with Tom a few days later. We were like comrades who had survived the same war. How's life treating you, Tom? I asked as we grabbed coffee. Tom sighed, stirring his cup. It's rough, Laura. Every day's a challenge. But like you said, we kick back harder, right? Right. We rebuild, stronger and wiser, I said, feeling a sense of solidarity. We chatted more about moving forward, about not letting our past define us. It was a conversation tinged with sadness, but also hope. Driving home, I thought about Chris and Anna. Last I heard, they were together, but far from happy. Anna, used to a life of luxury, was now stuck in a cramped apartment, constantly at Chris's throat for the financial mess they were in. A neighbor told me how they were always fighting, their arguments loud enough for the whole block to hear. Police were there just last week, she had said, shaking her head in disapproval. It was ironic. They had betrayed us, thinking they'd find happiness with each other, but all they found was misery. Every scandal, every shout I imagined between them was a reminder that karma does its job. As I entered my apartment, the quiet was a balm to my soul. I was alone, yes, but at peace. I had weathered a storm I never saw coming and came out stronger. I gazed out of my window, the world outside oblivious to my struggles and triumphs. Here's to new beginnings, I whispered to myself, a small but determined smile on my lips. I turned from the window, feeling a sense of empowerment. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. I had survived, I had learned, and now it was time to live.
Look, it's not like Mark and I had fireworks or anything when we met. We just clicked, you know? We were two people who found out we fit well together, and that was that. Love came later, like a surprise guest at a party you didn't know you were throwing. I'm Emily, by the way. Emily Johnson. Well, now it's Patterson since I married Mark. Mark's a great guy, steady and kind. But his family? That's a whole other story. His dad, Mr. Patterson, he's all right. A quiet man who loves his garden more than anything. But his mom, Mrs. Patterson, and we just never hit it off. Then there's Linda, married to Mark's older brother, Dave. She's the perfect daughter-in-law, always agreeing with Mrs. Patterson, always a step ahead in pleasing her. It's like she's playing a role in some drama where she's the star, and Mrs. Patterson is the adoring audience. So one day, we're all at their place for dinner. Mark and I, Dave and Linda, and the Pattersons, of course. Mrs. Patterson's going on and on about their new house. You know, the one they got with a huge mortgage? She's like a broken record, always comparing it to our small apartment. Mrs. Patterson's voice cut through the air, sharp and clear. You really should think about upgrading, Emily. Living in such a cramped space, it's just sad. I tried to keep my cool. We're happy with what we have, Mrs. Patterson. It's cozy. Linda chimed in, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. Oh, but just imagine having a place like this. You must be so envious. Mark squeezed my hand under the table, a silent plea for me to let it go. I bit my tongue and forced a smile. Yeah, Linda, maybe one day, I said, keeping my voice light. Mr. Patterson, trying to change the subject, asked Mark about his work. I was grateful for the distraction. Mark talked about his latest project, and for a moment, we all fell into a more comfortable conversation. But Mrs. Patterson couldn't help herself. Well, it's good you're keeping busy, Mark. But with Emily not working, I do wonder how you manage. It must be tough. I felt my face flush. Actually, I've been thinking about starting my own business, I said, more to stand my ground than anything else. Mrs. Patterson raised an eyebrow. A business? What can you possibly do? Before I could answer, Linda laughed. Oh, let's not bore ourselves with fantasies. More wine, anyone? The evening dragged on, filled with more jabs and thinly veiled insults. By the time Mark and I got back to our apartment, I was fuming. Mark tried to calm me down. Hey, just ignore them. We know what we have, and that's all that matters. I nodded, but inside, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being looked down upon, of being the underdog in a family that thrived on appearances and material wealth. Little did I know, things were about to get a whole lot more complicated. Life's funny, you know? One minute you're thinking you've got it all figured out, and the next, you're wondering how you got stuck in this sitcom of a family drama. That's how it felt every time we visited Mark's parents. Their new house was like a trophy, big, shiny, and always on display. I remember this one Saturday. Mark and I were at our place, enjoying our usual lazy morning routine, when he got a call from his dad, asking if we could come over. I knew what that meant. Another round of show off the house and make Emily feel small. We got there, and Mrs. Patterson was in full hostess mode, guiding us through rooms we'd seen a dozen times already. And here's the new coffee table we got. Italian marble, you know. It's quite expensive, but you get what you pay for. Mark, bless him, always tried to be diplomatic. Looks great, Mom. Really ties the room together. I just nodded along. What else could I do? Then came the inevitable comparison. I just can't imagine how you two manage in that tiny apartment of yours. It must feel so cramped, Mrs. Patterson said, her voice all sugary concern. I felt my patience wearing thin. It's not that bad, Mrs. Patterson. We like it. She tisked, shaking her head. But you deserve better, Emily. A woman should have a proper home, not some shoebox. Before I could bite back a retort, Mark's dad, Mr. Patterson, called out from the kitchen. Anyone wants a beer? I'll help you, Dad, Mark said quickly, giving me a look that said, please, no drama. I was left alone with Mrs. Patterson and Linda. Linda, ever the eager sidekick, piped up. You know, Emily, there's a certain charm to living minimally, but of course, it's not for everyone. Some of us prefer comfort. Exactly, Linda. Comfort and style, Mrs. Patterson added, glancing around her lavish living room. I forced a smile. Well, everyone has their own taste, right? We're happy with what we have. Mrs. Patterson sniffed. Of course, dear. Happiness is all relative after all. The rest of the visit was more of the same subtle digs and not so subtle boasts. By the time we left, I was mentally exhausted. On the drive back, Mark tried to lighten the mood. Hey, don't let them get to you. You know how they are. I sighed, staring out the window. I know, it's just... It feels like it's never going to end, you know? Mark reached over and squeezed my hand. We'll get through it. We always do. But as we drove back to our shoebox, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of frustration. Why did it always have to be a competition with them? Why couldn't they just be happy for us as we were? Life's like a roller coaster, they say. You never see the twist coming. That week was one such twist for me. I got a call from my mom, telling me that Grandpa had passed away. I was heartbroken, of course. He was always kind to me, a bit of a silent supporter in my corner. The shock came when we found out he left me a pretty hefty sum, $500,000. I couldn't believe it. Mark was happy for me, in his quiet way. "That's great, Em. Grandpa really cared about you." But when we told his family, well, that was a whole different story. We were at another family dinner when I mentioned it, not thinking much of it. Mrs. Patterson's eyes lit up like Christmas lights. $500,000? My word, Emily, that's quite a sum. Linda was quick to add her 2 cents. Oh, the things you could do with that money. But the mood shifted when Mr. Patterson coughed, a deep, rattling sound that had us all looking his way. He waved us off. Just a bit under the weather, that's all. The conversation moved on, but I couldn't shake off the concern for Mr. Patterson. He looked pale, more tired than usual. It was only a couple of days later when we got the news. Mark's voice was somber when he told me, "Dad's sick, Em. Really sick. The doctors are saying it's serious." I felt a cold knot in my stomach. How bad? Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "They're not sure. Could be weeks, maybe less." The news hit the family hard. Mrs. Patterson was a mess, but not in the way you'd expect. It was more about the what now than the what if. We were in their living room, Mrs. Patterson pacing like a caged animal. What are we going to do? The mortgage, the bills. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mrs. Patterson, shouldn't we be more worried about Mr. Patterson right now?" She rounded on me, her eyes sharp. "Of course I'm worried about him, but life goes on, Emily. We have to think about these things." Linda was nodding along, ever the faithful echo. "She's right, Emily. It's important to be practical." I looked at Mark, hoping for some support, but he just looked tired, torn between his ailing father and his panicking mother. I bit back any further comments. It wasn't the time or place. But as we left that night, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. It wasn't just Mr. Patterson's illness that worried me. It was the way Mrs. Patterson and Linda were so focused on the money, the house. It felt like priorities were all wrong, and I had a sinking feeling that things were about to get a lot more complicated. Mark's dad's condition worsened fast. It was like watching a candle flicker out. We were spending more time at their place, trying to be there for him, you know? But Mrs. Patterson, she was a whole different story. Always talking about the mortgage, the bills, as if that was the biggest worry. One evening, we were all there, the whole family. Mr. Patterson was lying in bed, looking frail and tired. Out of nowhere, he asked to speak to Mark alone. Just them two. It was strange, seeing him so serious. Mark looked taken aback, but nodded. "Sure, Dad, let's talk." They went into the bedroom and closed the door. That's when I noticed Mrs. Patterson and Linda. They were like cats who heard a can opener. Their ears practically perked up. "What do you think they're talking about?" Linda whispered to Mrs. Patterson, not even trying to hide her curiosity. Mrs. Patterson had that look, you know, like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "I don't know, but I bet it's about the will or the house." I was standing there, feeling awkward, when Linda turned to me. "Emily, you must be dying to know, right? I mean, with your husband being the only son and all." I shrugged, not wanting to play into their game. It's their business. If Mark wants to tell me, he will. But inside, I was curious. What was so important that it had to be said in private? After what felt like ages, Mark came out. His face was unreadable. Mrs. Patterson and Linda pounced like hawks. "Well, what did he say?" Mrs. Patterson demanded. Mark shook his head. "It's personal, Mom. Dad just had some things to get off his chest." Linda tried a different angle. "But it must be about his will, right? Or the house?" Mark's expression didn't change. "Linda, I'm not discussing it. It was a private conversation." The air was tense after that. Mrs. Patterson kept shooting me these looks, like I was hiding something. But the truth was, I knew as little as she did. That night, back at our place, I asked Mark about it. "So, what did your dad want to talk about?" Mark was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at me, his eyes serious. "He's worried, Em. About Mom, the house, everything. He just wanted to make sure I knew what to do, you know, after—" I nodded, understanding. Of course, but deep down, I had this feeling that there was more to it. Something Mark wasn't telling me. And whatever it was, I knew it was big. Mr. Patterson's passing hit everyone like a ton of bricks. It was one of those times when you realize life's too short, but some people never get that memo. The funeral was barely over when Mrs. Patterson started talking about the mortgage again. We were all at their house after the service, kind of a somber gathering when she brought it up. Now that he's gone, we need to think about the future. The mortgage on this house won't pay itself. Linda was nodding along, always her loyal supporter. It's a lot of responsibility, especially now. I was still in my black dress, feeling the weight of the day when Mark's mom turned to me. "Emily, you recently came into some money, right? It only seems fair that you contribute, given the circumstances." I was stunned. Was she really asking me to pay off their mortgage with my inheritance? "Mrs. Patterson, it's not why Grandpa left me that money." Mark was rubbing his temples, looking like he wanted to be anywhere but there. "Mom, let's not do this now, please." But she was like a dog with a bone. "Mark, I'm just being practical. We're family, and families support each other. Emily, you can afford it now, can't you?" I felt my face getting hot. It's not about affording it. It's about what's right. That money was meant for me and Mark, for our future. Mrs. Patterson's face hardened. "Well, this is your family's future too, isn't it? Unless you don't consider us family." Before I could reply, Mark squeezed my hand. "Let's talk about this later, okay? It's been a long day." But Mrs. Patterson wasn't having it. "No, I want to know now. What will you do, Emily? Will you help your family or not?" The room was tense. Linda was watching me like a hawk, waiting for my response. I took a deep breath. We'll think about it, but this isn't the time or the place to decide." Mrs. Patterson seemed somewhat appeased, but her eyes were cold. "Fine, but remember, family is everything. We have to stick together." As we left, I felt Mark's hand in mine, tight and reassuring. But inside, I was reeling. The nerve of her, asking for my inheritance like it was nothing. It felt like she was trying to claim something that wasn't hers, and it didn't sit right with me at all. After much back and forth and a heavy heart, I decided to use my inheritance to pay off the mortgage on Mrs. Patterson's house. It was a decision I didn't take lightly, and I did it mostly for Mark's sake. We were at Mrs. Patterson's house for a dinner she organized to celebrate the mortgage being paid off. The whole event felt surreal, like being thanked for a favor I never wanted to give. As we sat down for dinner, Mrs. Patterson was beaming. "Emily, this is such a generous contribution you've made. We're all deeply thankful." I nodded, a tight smile on my face. "Happy to help, Mrs. Patterson." Then Linda chimed in with her usual saccharine tone. "Really, Emily, you're just too kind." The dinner was awkward but manageable, until Mrs. Patterson stood up with a glass in her hand for a toast. "I have something to announce. Now that the mortgage is taken care of, I've decided to give this house to Dave and Linda." My jaw dropped. "Excuse me? What did you just say?" I expected Mark to be as shocked as I was, but to my surprise, he just nodded and smiled. "Is that so, Mom? Interesting decision." His calm response threw me off. Why wasn't he upset? Mrs. Patterson looked pleased as punch. "Yes, it only seems right. They need it more, and after all, Emily, you and Mark are doing fine on your own." Linda's grin was wide, almost gloating. "We're just so grateful, aren't we, Dave?" Dave nodded, looking like the cat that got the cream. I was fuming, feeling betrayed and used. "We paid off this house with my money. How can you just give it away to them?" Mrs. Patterson's expression was firm, almost challenging. "I'm still the head of this family, Emily. It's my decision to make." Mark's hand on my knee under the table was a silent message to stay calm. His eyes were telling me he had a plan. As the dinner descended into an uncomfortable silence, my mind was racing. What was Mark up to? He clearly knew something I didn't. The look in his eyes was not of defeat, but of someone holding an ace up their sleeve. As we drove back, I turned to Mark. "You knew, didn't you? You knew what your mother was going to do." Mark's smile was mysterious. "Let's just say, I had a feeling. Don't worry, Em. This isn't over yet." His words were cryptic, but they gave me a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we weren't as outplayed as I thought. Sitting in our living room, the tension was thick. Mark finally broke the silence. Em, there's something you should know. About the house. Dad did something before he passed. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. What are you talking about? Mark took a deep breath. Dad knew about Mom's plans with the house. He didn't trust her to do right by us, so he changed the mortgage and the house deed into our names. I was stunned. What? But how? He did it right after he found out about his illness, Mark explained. He wanted to make sure the house went to those who really paid for it. That's us, Em. We own the house now. I couldn't believe it. Mr. Patterson had seen through his wife's intentions and protected us. But why keep it a secret? I asked. Mark looked down. Dad asked me to. He didn't want more drama until it was absolutely necessary. Before we could talk further, there was an aggressive knock. Mrs. Patterson, Dave, and Linda stood at our door, their faces twisted in anger. Mrs. Patterson wasted no time. Mark, you need to explain this nonsense about the house. This is outrageous. Mark stood up, calm but firm. Mom, Dad knew what was happening. He legally transferred the house to us, the mortgage too. We paid it off, so now it's ours by law. Their reactions were explosive. Mrs. Patterson's face turned red with fury. That's impossible. He would never do that to me. Linda was almost hysterical. This is a lie. You're trying to steal our inheritance. Dave looked like he was about to explode. You can't just take the house, Mark. It's not yours. Mark handed them a folder. Here are the papers. The deed, the mortgage transfer, everything. It's all legal and binding. Mrs. Patterson snatched the papers, her hands trembling. As she scanned them, her face drained of color. This is a trick. You must have forced him, she screamed. No, Mom. Dad was clear-headed. He did this to protect what's fair, Mark replied, his voice steady. The argument went on, their accusations filling the room. But the truth was in black and white. The house was legally ours. You've torn this family apart, Linda yelled, tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Patterson turned to me, eyes filled with hatred. You've done this, Emily. You and your money. But I stood my ground, feeling a sense of justice. No, Mrs. Patterson, this was Mr. Patterson's decision. He wanted to right a wrong. Eventually, they left, seething with anger and disbelief. The door closed behind them, leaving us in a bittersweet silence. We had the house, but at what cost? Yet, in my heart, I knew we had honored Mr. Patterson's wishes. He had given us a home, and in doing so, had also given us a new start. We thought the worst was over until Dave, red-faced with anger, burst into our house a few days later. You think you've won, huh? Dave was practically shouting. Dad paid a chunk of the mortgage before he died, $100,000. That means part of the house belongs to us. Mark remained calm, something I'd always admired about him. Dave, Dad thought of that. He asked me to deposit an equivalent amount into a separate account in case of disputes. I was standing in the corner, watching the scene unfold. Dave, his face a mix of anger and confusion, and Mrs. Patterson, who had followed him in, looking like a thundercloud. What? That's preposterous, Mrs. Patterson stammered. Mark continued. The $100,000 will be divided among the heirs, you, Mom, and me. That was Dad's wish. Mrs. Patterson was shaking with rage. This is a trick. You're manipulating everything. You've always been cruel and selfish. Linda, tears streaming down her face, joined in. How can you do this to your own family? It's heartless. The air was thick with tension and accusations. I felt a surge of courage and stepped forward. Enough! I raised my voice, something I rarely did. This is our home. Dad made his decision, and it's legal. It's time you all accept it. Dave was seething. This isn't the end, Mark. We won't let this go. Mark's response was firm, yet calm. You do what you need to, Dave. But this was Dad's decision. We're just honoring it. The confrontation ended with Mrs. Patterson, Dave, and Linda leaving our house, their threats and accusations still hanging in the air. As the door closed behind them, Mark and I were left in the quiet of our home, a mixture of relief and sadness in the air. Mark wrapped his arms around me. "I'm sorry you had to go through all this, Em." I leaned into his embrace. "It's not your fault. We did what was right." We stood there for a moment, in the home that had caused so much turmoil, but was now truly ours. The story ends with us, living peacefully in the house, while Mrs. Patterson moved in with Dave and Linda in their small apartment. It wasn't an easy victory, and the family ties were strained, but we had each other and a home that was ours, fair and square. That was enough for us. I never thought I'd be here, sitting in the living room of what used to be our house, feeling like a stranger in my own life. My name is Emily, and just a few months ago, I was living what I thought was a happy life with my husband, Mark. We were the couple everyone envied, or so I believed. Mark, once a charming and attentive man, had become someone I hardly recognized. His once warm eyes now seemed cold and distant. It all changed after my dad passed away. Dad was my rock, and losing him felt like losing a part of myself. But for Mark, it seemed like an opportunity. The evening air was heavy as I sat across from Mark, the silence between us a stark contrast to the laughter and love that once filled this room. "Are you even listening to me, Emily?" Mark's voice, sharp and impatient, broke the silence. I looked up, meeting his gaze. "Yes, I'm listening," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's simple. I want a divorce. I've already talked to a lawyer. This house, it's mine. You need to start looking for somewhere else to live." His words hit me like a ton of bricks. I had sensed the growing distance between us, but divorce? I was speechless. "You can't be serious, Mark. After all these years, you're just going to throw everything away?" I finally managed to say, my voice tinged with disbelief. Mark leaned back in his chair, a cold, unfazed look on his face. "It's not just throwing away, Emily. It's moving on. I've been feeling trapped in this marriage, and now, with your dad gone, I see no reason to continue this charade." I felt a mixture of anger and heartbreak. How could he be so cruel, so heartless? My father was gone, and now Mark, the man I had loved and trusted, was abandoning me too. "I don't understand you, Mark. You used to be so different, so caring. What happened to us?" Mark let out a sarcastic laugh. "Oh, please. Spare me the drama, Emily. You should start packing. The sooner you're out, the better." I sat there, stunned and hurt, trying to process everything. This wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the shattering of an illusion. The illusion of a happy life that I had clung to for so long. And now, I was alone, with nothing but memories of a love that turned out to be nothing but a facade. My life, already hanging by a thread, spiraled further into chaos with the arrival of Mrs. Harwood, Mark's mother. She moved in unannounced, bringing with her an air of hostility that choked the already tense atmosphere of the house. "Emily, I expect you to behave appropriately while I'm here," Mrs. Harwood declared, her voice sharp as she settled into the living room, making it clear that she considered herself in charge. I tried to reason with her. "Mrs. Harwood, I understand this is a difficult time for everyone, but I assure you, I have no intention of causing trouble." She fixed me with a cold stare. "Trouble seems to follow you, dear. I've seen how you and Mark have been living. It's no wonder my son wants a divorce." Her words cut deep, but I wasn't about to let her walk over me. "Mark and I are adults. We'll handle our matters ourselves. Your interference isn't needed." She scoffed. "Interference? I'm protecting my son from your manipulative ways. You've done enough damage already." The days that followed were a blur of constant snide remarks and belittling comments from Mrs. Harwood. She criticized everything from the way I dressed to the way I cooked. It felt like she was trying to erase my presence from the house. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, she came into the kitchen. "You're using too much salt. Don't you know anything about cooking?" I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my cool. "I've been cooking for myself and Mark for years. He's never complained." "Well, he's too kind to say anything, but I'm not. You're ruining his health with your terrible cooking." I couldn't believe the audacity of this woman. "Mrs. Harwood, I appreciate your concern, but I can manage." She leaned against the counter, watching me like a hawk. You can manage, can you? We'll see how long that lasts. Every interaction with her was an exercise in restraint. She had an opinion on everything and wasn't afraid to voice it, loudly and often. It was like she was trying to provoke me, to push me to my breaking point. Mark, for his part, did nothing to ease the tension. He avoided being in the same room with us, leaving me to fend for myself against his mother's relentless attacks. It was clear he had no intention of standing up for me, not anymore. One morning, as I sat at the breakfast table, Mrs. Harwood sat across from me, her eyes cold and calculating. "You know, Emily, it's not too late to leave gracefully. You could save yourself a lot of trouble." I met her gaze, my resolve hardening. "I have as much right to be here as you do, Mrs. Harwood. I'm not leaving until the divorce is finalized." She smirked. "Stubborn, aren't you? Well, we'll see how long that lasts. Mark doesn't want you here, and neither do I. You're just a guest, and guests can be asked to leave." Her words echoed in my head, a constant reminder of the unwelcome and precarious position I found myself in. But I wasn't about to give up. I had to stand my ground, no matter how difficult Mrs. Harwood made it. The house had become a battleground, and I was determined not to be the one who surrendered. Living with Mrs. Harwood under the same roof was like walking on eggshells. But the day she crossed the line was when she targeted my cat, Whiskers. Whiskers was more than just a pet. He was a part of my world, a comfort in my loneliest times. I came home to find Mrs. Harwood standing in the hallway, a look of disgust on her face as she glared at Whiskers. "That filthy animal," she spat. "I want it out of my son's house. It's either the cat or you, Emily." I felt a surge of anger. "Whiskers isn't going anywhere. He's part of this family." She sneered. "That thing is a nuisance. I won't have it shedding and spreading germs all over." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "He's a harmless cat, Mrs. Harwood. You're being unreasonable." She moved closer, her voice cold and harsh. "Listen here, Emily. I call the shots now. Either that cat goes, or things will get very unpleasant for you." I knew arguing with her was futile. She had made up her mind, and nothing I said would change it. I had to think fast. That's when I remembered my friend Sarah, an animal lover who had always adored Whiskers. I called Sarah, my voice shaky. "Sarah, I need a huge favor. Can you look after Whiskers for a while? I'm in a bit of a situation here." Sarah was quick to respond. "Of course, Emily. What's going on? Are you okay?" I sighed. "It's a long story. I'll explain later. But thank you. You're a lifesaver." Packing Whiskers' things felt like a defeat, but I knew it was for the best. As I was about to leave with Whiskers, Mrs. Harwood blocked my path. "Finally, some sense," she said, a smug smile on her face. "I knew you'd do the right thing." I held back my anger. "This isn't over, Mrs. Harwood. I'm doing this for Whiskers, not for you." She laughed. "Oh, keep telling yourself that, dear, but we both know who's in charge here." One day, I found my clothes ruined. My favorite dress, my comfy sweaters, everything was bleached. It was no accident. I stormed into the living room where Mrs. Harwood was reading a magazine, looking too innocent. "Did you do this?" I held up the ruined dress, my voice shaking with anger. She looked up, feigning surprise. "Oh dear, what happened to your dress?" "Don't play dumb, Mrs. Harwood. You put bleach in the wash," I accused. She shrugged, a smirk creeping onto her face. "Oh, that. I was cleaning the machine. Must have forgotten to rinse it out. Accidents happen, dear." I was fuming. "This wasn't an accident. You did this on purpose." She leaned back, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Prove it, Emily. It's my word against yours, and we both know who my son will believe." I felt helpless and defeated. She was right. Mark would never take my side over his mother's. Later that day, I confronted Mark. "Your mother ruined my clothes. You need to talk to her." Mark didn't even look up from his phone. "Mom said it was an accident. Stop making a big deal out of everything." I couldn't believe his indifference. "She's doing this on purpose, Mark. Can't you see what she's doing?" He sighed, annoyed. "Look, Emily, I don't want to get involved. Just stay out of her way." Stay out of her way? This was supposed to be my home, too. I realized then that I was alone in this. Mark wouldn't help me. His mother was out to get me, and I had to fend for myself. The destruction of my clothes was just the beginning of Mrs. Harwood's campaign against me. Each day brought a new challenge, a new way for her to assert her dominance and make me feel unwelcome in my own home. I started to notice little things missing or out of place. My favorite mug cracked, my pictures taken down from the walls, small but personal attacks. It was a psychological game, and she was playing to win. One evening, I came home to find the living room in a mess. My books were scattered on the floor, pages torn. I confronted Mrs. Harwood, who was sitting calmly with a cup of tea. "Did you do this?" I asked, holding up a torn book. She glanced at it, then back at me, with a cold, indifferent expression. "Oh, those old things? I thought they were trash. You should be more careful about what you leave around." I was outraged. "These are my books, Mrs. Harwood. You have no right to touch them." She shrugged, unfazed. "This is my son's house. I'll do as I please. Maybe you should start packing your trash." I felt a burning anger, but also a sense of helplessness. Arguing with her was pointless. She had made it clear that she didn't respect me or my belongings. The next morning, I found my toiletries thrown in the trash. My shampoo, my face cream, everything gone. I dug them out, my hands shaking with anger. This was more than just petty sabotage. It was a declaration of war. I confronted Mark again. "Your mother threw away my toiletries. This has to stop." He barely glanced at me. "Maybe it was a mistake. Just buy new ones." "A mistake? She's doing this deliberately, Mark. Can't you see that?" I was near tears, frustrated by his continued indifference. He stood up, his voice cold. "I'm not getting into this, Emily. Sort it out with her." Sort it out with her? How was I supposed to sort out deliberate cruelty? I tried to keep to myself, to avoid Mrs. Harwood, but she seemed to take my avoidance as a challenge. She'd make loud, snide comments about me on the phone, ensuring I could hear every word. She'd accidentally spill things on the floor I'd just cleaned, watch me as I cleaned up, a satisfied smirk on her face. One afternoon, I found my laptop screen cracked. It was the last straw. I stormed into the kitchen, where Mrs. Harwood was humming to herself. "What did you do to my laptop?" I demanded, my voice shaking with rage. She turned, feigning ignorance. "Oh, did something happen to your laptop? That's unfortunate." "You did this, didn't you? You're trying to make my life hell." She leaned in, her voice a venomous whisper. "You brought this on yourself, Emily. You're not wanted here. The sooner you realize that, the better." Just when I thought things couldn't get worse with Mrs. Harwood, she struck where it hurt the most. My father's pictures, the last memories I had of him, were gone. I had put them up in the living room, a small comfort in these trying times. But now, the walls were bare, as if he had never been a part of my life. I found Mrs. Harwood in the kitchen, smirking over a cup of coffee. "Where are my father's pictures?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up, feigning confusion. "Pictures? Oh, those old things. We needed more space. This isn't a shrine, Emily." I felt a surge of anger, my hands trembling. "Those were my father's pictures. You had no right to take them down." She shrugged, her voice cold and dismissive. "They were depressing, always staring at us. It's time to move on, Emily. He's gone, and clinging to the past won't change that." I couldn't believe her cruelty. "You can't just erase him from my life. Those pictures were all I had left of him." She stood up, towering over me. "Your father has nothing to do with this house. It's time you accepted that and moved on. Just like your marriage, it's in the past now." I wanted to scream, to cry, to do something to show how much she had hurt me. But I knew that's what she wanted. So, I held back, biting my tongue. "You're heartless," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "I'm practical, Emily. It's a trait you clearly lack. You should learn to let go." I left the kitchen, my heart heavy with loss and anger. Mrs. Harwood had taken the last piece of my father from me, and it felt like losing him all over again. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the empty spaces on the walls echoing in my mind. Mrs. Harwood's words kept replaying in my head. Let go. Move on. But how could I? Those pictures were more than just images. They were a connection to my father, a reminder of his love and presence in my life. I knew then that this was more than just a battle over living space. It was a fight for my memories, my past, and my identity. Mrs. Harwood had declared war on the most personal parts of my life, and I couldn't let her win. I had to find a way to fight back, to reclaim my father's memory and my right to mourn him. It was a battle I couldn't afford to lose. Just when I thought all hope was lost, a call from a notary changed everything. I was sitting in my room, trying to muster the strength to face another day with Mrs. Harwood, when my phone rang. Mrs. Emily Harwood? This is John Carter, the notary handling your father's will. We need you to come in to discuss some important matters. The voice on the other end said. I was taken aback. My father's will? I wasn't aware he had left anything. Yes, he did. It's quite urgent. Can you come in today? Mr. Carter's tone was serious. I agreed, curiosity and a glimmer of hope stirring within me. Maybe this was the break I needed. At the notary's office, Mr. Carter handed me a folder. Your father left you a significant amount of money, Miss Emily, enough to start a new life. I was speechless. My father, always the quiet supporter, had given me a lifeline. And there's something else, Mr. Carter continued, handing me another set of documents. Your father left these for you. He said they were important. I opened the documents, but Mr. Carter stopped me. Perhaps you should look at these in private. They're quite personal. I nodded, clutching the folder tightly as I left the office. Back home, I locked myself in my room and began to read. The documents were records of financial transactions between my father and Mark. My father had lent Mark a significant amount of money, over $200,000. I couldn't believe it. All this time, Mark had been in debt to my father. Was this why he was so eager to divorce me after my father's death? Did he think the debt died with him? I felt a surge of strength. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had the upper hand. My father had given me more than just money. He had given me the power to fight back. I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. I was going to make Mark pay for his deceit and Mrs. Harwood for her cruelty. The tables had turned, and it was my turn to set the rules. Armed with the truth about Mark's debt to my father, I felt a newfound sense of power. The day of the divorce signing, I was ready to turn the tables. As we sat in the lawyer's office, Mark and his mother smirking confidently, I waited for the right moment. Just as Mark was about to sign, I spoke up. Before we finalize this, there's something you should know, Mark, I said, sliding the loan documents across the table. He glanced at them, his smirk fading fast. What's this? I leaned back, feeling in control for the first time in months. That's the debt you owe my father, over $200,000. And now, it's owed to me. Mrs. Harwood's eyes widened in shock. What debt? Mark, what is she talking about? Mark's face was a mask of panic. It's nothing, Mom. Just some old business between Emily's dad and me. I laughed. So, you thought you'd get away with not repaying him? That's why you were so eager to get rid of me? Mark didn't meet my eyes. It's complicated, Emily. I was in trouble, and your dad offered to help. I shook my head, disgusted. You were going to leave me with nothing while sitting on a debt you owed my father. You're despicable. He tried to touch me, but I backed away. You've been hiding this. You owe me that money, and I intend to collect. The lawyer, a middle-aged man who had been silent till now, interjected. If these documents are legitimate, Mr. Mark, you're legally obligated to repay this debt. Mrs. Harwood turned to her son, her voice rising. You borrowed money from her father, and now we have to pay her? Mark tried to speak, but I was faster. Yes, he did, and he thought he could escape it by divorcing me quickly after my father's death. The room was tense, the air thick with the revelation. Mrs. Harwood looked from the documents to Mark, her expression one of betrayal and anger. You've been lying to us all along, she hissed at Mark. You put us in this mess. Mark's usual confident demeanor had crumbled. He looked defeated, cornered. I had no choice. I was in trouble, and Emily's dad offered to help. I stood up, feeling a rush of satisfaction. Well, now you can repay that help. Every single dollar. You thought you could outsmart me, but you were wrong. Mrs. Harwood was fuming. We'll fight this. We won't let you take everything from us. But I knew I had the upper hand. You can try, but the law is on my side. I suggest you start figuring out how you're going to repay the debt. As I walked out of the lawyer's office, I felt a sense of triumph. For so long, I had been under Mark and his mother's control, their whims and cruelty dictating my life. But now, the tables had turned. I had them right where I wanted, and I wasn't going to let them off easy. This was my chance to get back what I was owed, and I was going to take it. The day Mark and Mrs. Harwood sold the house to repay the debt was the day I finally felt free. As they packed their last boxes, I couldn't help but savor the moment. You brought this on yourself, Mark, I said, watching him struggle with a heavy box. You could have been honest with me. He avoided my gaze, his shoulders slumped. I know. I'm sorry, Emily. Mrs. Harwood, looking older and more defeated than ever, chimed in. This is all your fault. You've ruined everything. I shook my head, no longer affected by her words. No, Mrs. Harwood, you two did this to yourselves. I'm just claiming what's rightfully mine. They left without another word, and I watched as their car disappeared down the road. It was the end of an era, one filled with pain and betrayal, but also growth and resilience. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past months lift off my shoulders. It was time to start anew. With the money from my father and the repaid debt, I bought a small, cozy house, just for me and Whiskers, who I had brought back home. Sitting in my new living room, Whiskers purring on my lap, I called Sarah, my friend who had helped me through the darkest times. Hey Sarah, it's done. I'm finally free, I said, a smile spreading across my face. Sarah's voice was warm and excited. That's amazing, Emily. I'm so proud of you. You've come so far. I looked around my new home, a sense of peace settling over me. I have, and it's all thanks to people like you who stood by me. You deserve all the happiness in the world, Emily. What's next for you? Sarah asked. I thought for a moment. A fresh start, building a life that's truly mine, and maybe helping others who've been through what I have. As I hung up, I realized that this was more than just a new house. It was a new chapter, one where I was in control, free from the shadows of the past. I had not only survived, I had come out stronger. I stood up, Whiskers following me as I walked to the window, looking out at my small garden. It was a new beginning, a chance to rebuild and to find joy in the simple things. I had lost much, but I had gained even more, a sense of self, strength, and the courage to move forward. This was my story, my journey, and it was just beginning. I never thought juggling cameras, kids, and a calendar crammed with appointments would be my daily circus. But here I am, at 39, a freelance photographer with a life that's always a click away from chaos. My name's Sarah, and my world revolves around two things: my camera lens and my family. My husband, Mike, is the kind of guy who's married to his job. He works as a sales rep for a company with branches across 3 cities. I can't remember the last time we had a meal together without him rushing off or being glued to his laptop. And then, there are our kids, Lily and Max, both in school, and a whirlwind of activities and homework. Mama, have you seen my math book? Lily's voice snaps me back from my thoughts as I sort through my camera gear. It's probably under the pile of clothes in your room, I reply, without looking up. Max runs in, his soccer ball thumping against the walls. Mom, can you sign this form for my field trip? Sure, bud. Just give me a minute, I say, balancing a camera in one hand and the form in the other. As the kids dash off to their rooms, I hear the front door open and close. Mike's home, probably just to grab something and dash off again. His presence in the house has become like a cameo appearance in a long-running show. Hey, Mike, how was your day? I ask, not expecting much of a conversation. Same old, just tired. Got another trip tomorrow, he says, barely looking up from his phone. I was thinking maybe this weekend we could do something as a family. You know, take the kids out or something, I suggest, hoping for a change. Yeah, maybe. I'll see how it goes, he replies, his attention still on his phone. I sigh, realizing it's a lost cause. It's always maybe or we'll see. The kids and I have become experts at filling in the blanks of his absence. The evening rolls on with the usual routine: dinner, homework, bedtime stories, and finally, some quiet. I sit on the porch, my camera by my side, capturing the night sky. It's my moment of peace, a brief escape from the relentless pace of life. But who am I kidding? Even in these quiet moments, my mind races with tomorrow's to-do list, unanswered emails, and the ever-looming question, when will things change? As I head back inside, I make a mental note to check my schedule for next week. It's a balancing act, and I'm the ringmaster of my own chaotic circus. But in this hustle and bustle, I often wonder, when did life become a series of tasks to tick off rather than moments to live? Life as a freelance photographer is never predictable, but nothing prepared me for the curveball I was about to receive. It was just another Wednesday morning, and I was out for a walk with our dog, Buster. The sun was shining, but my mind was cloudy with thoughts of upcoming projects and deadlines. Come on, Buster, let's make this quick. Mommy's got a ton of editing to do, I muttered, tugging slightly at his leash. Just as we turned the corner near the park, Buster spotted a cat, and in a split second, everything went haywire. He lunged forward, pulling the leash with such force that I lost my balance and fell hard onto the pavement. Ow! Buster, stop! I yelled, but he was too busy chasing the cat to notice. I tried to get up, but a sharp pain shot through my leg. Great, just what I needed. Limping back home, I called Mike. Hey, I think I hurt my leg. Can you come home early? Sarah, I'm in a meeting. Can it wait? His voice was curt, a clear sign of his irritation. I just fell, Mike. It's not like I'm calling for fun, I snapped, frustration boiling over. Fine, I'll see what I can do, he replied, and the line went dead. After what felt like an eternity, I made it home. The pain was getting worse. I knew I had to see a doctor, but with Mike's unpredictable schedule and the kids at school, it was a logistical nightmare. The diagnosis was a fractured leg. Great. Just what I needed on top of everything else. The doctor advised rest, meaning no shoots, no chasing after the kids, nothing. As if my life wasn't chaotic enough. Back home, with my leg in a cast, I felt like a bird trapped in a cage. Mike had to take over some of my duties, which he did with an obvious lack of enthusiasm. This is a real mess, Sarah. How long till you're back on your feet? Mike asked, his tone more concerned with the inconvenience than my pain. A few weeks at least. It's not like I planned this, you know, I retorted, my patience wearing thin. The kids were surprisingly helpful, though. Lily took over some of the house chores, and Max tried his best to be less of a tornado around the house. Mom, can I get you anything? Lily asked, her concern genuine. Just some peace would be nice, I replied with a tired smile. Days turned into weeks. I was stuck at home, my world reduced to the four walls of our living room. Mike was out most of the time, and the kids were busy with school. The loneliness was suffocating. In a desperate attempt to find something to occupy my time, I decided to explore photography forums online. Little did I know, this decision would turn my world upside down. Stuck at home with my leg in a cast, I found myself diving deeper into the world of online photography forums. It was a nice distraction, scrolling through endless galleries of beautiful images. It almost made me forget the throbbing pain in my leg. Almost. One evening, while mindlessly browsing, something caught my eye. A photo of a man proposing to a young woman. The scene was picturesque, but it wasn't the romantic setting that grabbed my attention. It was the man in the photo. He looked exactly like Mike, my husband. Same build, same hair, even the same suit that I had bought him last Christmas. No, this can't be, I murmured to myself, my heart pounding. It just looks like him, that's all. But the more I looked at it, the more I couldn't shake the feeling. It was more than just a resemblance. I had to know more. I messaged the photographer, a woman named Jenna. Hi Jenna, I came across your photo of the marriage proposal. Can you tell me more about it? Where was it taken? Jenna replied quickly. Sure, that was taken in Riverdale. Lovely couple. Why do you ask? I hesitated, not sure how to explain without sounding paranoid. I was just curious. The man in the photo looks a lot like someone I know. I waited anxiously for her response, hoping she'd offer more information. But instead, she went silent. No reply came. Days passed, and the image haunted me. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time Mike came home, I studied his face, looking for any sign of guilt, any hint of betrayal. But he was his usual detached self, buried in his phone or laptop. One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I confronted him. "Mike, have you ever been to Riverdale on your business trips?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, a few times. Why?" He didn't even look up from his phone. "No reason. Just asking," I said, my voice trembling. The uncertainty was eating me alive. I had to know. I messaged Jenna again, this time more directly. "Jenna, I need to know. The man in your proposal photo, can you send me more shots of him? I think he might be my husband." This time, Jenna responded, "I'm sorry, I can't do that. It's against my policy to share personal photos without my client's consent." I pleaded, explaining my situation and my growing suspicions. After what felt like an eternity, Jenna finally relented. "Okay, I understand. I'll send you a few more shots, but please keep this between us." When the photos arrived, my heart sank. There he was, my Mike, down on one knee, holding a ring to a woman I had never seen before. The same loving gaze he once gave me was now directed at her. I sat there, staring at the screen, tears streaming down my face. My world, my marriage, everything I believed in, shattered in an instant. I never imagined myself in the role of a woman who'd hire a private detective. Yet, there I was, sitting across from Rick, a seasoned investigator with a face that didn't give anything away. I handed him photos of Mike and a list of cities he frequently visited. "I need to know what he's doing on these trips," I said, my voice a strange mix of fear and resolve. Rick nodded, his eyes scanning the photos. "I'll track his movements, see who he meets, but it's going to take some time. You okay with that?" I was far from okay, but I nodded. "I need the truth," was all I could muster. As Rick delved into his investigation, I was forced into a role I never wanted, the wife who pretends everything is normal. Mike, oblivious to the storm brewing, continued his business trips, leaving me alone with my swirling thoughts. I started noticing changes in Mike that I'd never seen before. His wardrobe underwent a transformation, suits that screamed designer labels, shoes that weren't from our usual budget stores. His cologne was different too, replaced by a scent that was more refined, more luxurious. These were subtle changes, but to me, they were glaring. Then there were the phone calls. Mike had always been private with his phone, but now it was excessive. He'd lock himself in the bathroom, speaking in hushed tones. I once pressed my ear against the door, trying to catch snippets of his conversation, but all I could hear was the muffled sound of his voice. I watched him closely, trying to find traces of the man I married in his new persona. But with every passing day, he seemed more like a stranger. I wondered how long he had been living this double life, right under my nose. The kids started to notice the tension. Lily, ever perceptive, asked one night, "Mom, is everything okay with you and Dad?" I forced a smile. "Everything's fine, sweetie. Just a lot on my mind with work." But it wasn't fine. The man I shared my bed with, the father of my children, felt like a mirage. I found myself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, piecing together the lies and half-truths. One evening, as Mike prepared for another trip, I found myself watching him pack. He moved with such ease, a routine he had mastered. There was no hesitation, no signs of guilt. It struck me then, how easy it is to deceive someone who trusts you completely. I reflected on our years together, wondering when the lies began. Had I been naive, too trusting? Or had I chosen to ignore the signs, too wrapped up in my own world? Weeks went by, and Rick finally called. "We need to meet." His voice was serious, carrying a weight that made my heart sink. We met at a quiet corner of a nearly empty cafe. He slid a thick envelope across the table. "I found quite a bit. You sure you're ready for this?" I wasn't sure of anything anymore, but I nodded. Inside the envelope were photos, receipts, and detailed reports. Every piece of evidence was like a knife twisting in my heart. There he was, my Mike, but not the Mike I knew. In each city, there was a different woman, a different life. I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and betrayal. My mind raced with questions. How could he do this? How long had he been living this lie? I paid Rick, barely speaking as I left. Walking home, the envelope felt like it weighed a ton. I realized then that all this while, I had been living with my eyes closed. I had refused to see the man Mike had become, clinging to the image of the husband I thought I knew. Now, with my eyes wide open, I saw everything clearly. The lies, the deceit, the reality of my marriage laid bare. It was a truth I couldn't run from anymore. Holding on to the truth about Mike's infidelities was like keeping a storm inside me. But I kept the photos a secret. I wasn't going to let him off easy. No, he deserved more than just a confrontation. He deserved a reckoning. I wanted to give him an unpleasant surprise, one that he'd remember for the rest of his life. As the days passed, my leg finally healed. I could walk without wincing in pain, a small victory that felt like a fresh start. But as one part of me healed, another part plotted revenge. Mike continued his routine, unaware of the storm brewing under his nose. He left for his trips and came back, slipping further into his web of lies. He thought he was smart, but he didn't know that I was now playing the game too. I crafted a plan, something that would expose his deceit in the most dramatic way possible. I wasn't going to tip my hand by letting him know what I knew. No, this had to be a surprise. I spent hours thinking, planning, making sure every detail was perfect. I watched him, pretending everything was normal, but inside, I was counting down the days. My heart had turned cold, each beat a reminder of his betrayal. Finally, everything was in place. The trap was set, and all I had to do was wait for the right moment. Mike was oblivious, still wrapped up in his lies, thinking he had fooled me. He had no idea what was coming. As I lay in bed that night, the phrase, "Revenge is a dish best served cold," echoed in my mind. I realized that was exactly what I was doing, serving him his just desserts, cold and unyielding. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, about taking back my life from someone who thought he could play me for a fool. The night I planned to confront Mike was etched in my mind like a date with destiny. I cooked his favorite meal, set the table with our best china, and even put on the dress he always said he liked. It was all a facade, a stage set for the final act. Mike walked in, looking tired but surprised at the effort I'd put in. "Wow, what's all this for?" he asked, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Just felt like doing something special," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside. We sat down, and for a while, I played the part of the doting wife. We talked about mundane things, but I was just biding my time, waiting for the right moment. The doorbell rang, and that was my cue. "Can you get that, honey?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. Mike got up, still unsuspecting, and walked to the door. I heard his footsteps, the door opening, and then a moment of silence before his voice, laced with shock. "What are you doing here?" I walked to the doorway, and there they were, the girl from the photos and her parents. The look on Mike's face was priceless, a mix of shock, fear, and confusion. "Sarah, what is this?" Mike turned to me, his voice a mix of accusation and panic. "This is me, giving you a taste of your own medicine," I said, my voice cold and sharp. The girl, tears in her eyes, confronted Mike. "You said you loved me, that we were going to be together." Her parents were furious, demanding answers, their voices raised in anger. Mike tried to speak, but words seemed to fail him. "You've been living a lie, Mike, and I have all the proof," I said, holding up the envelope Rick had given me. Mike's face went from red to pale. He looked at me, then at the girl and her parents, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You're a liar and a cheat," I spat out, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. The room was filled with shouting, accusations flying. Mike tried to explain, to apologize, but it was too late. The truth was out, and there was no going back. As the girl and her parents left, the reality of what had just happened seemed to sink in for Mike. He looked at me, his eyes searching for something, maybe forgiveness or understanding. But all I felt was disgust. "You need to leave," I said, my voice void of emotion. He didn't argue, just packed a few things and left. The house was suddenly quiet, the echoes of the confrontation still hanging in the air. The days following the confrontation were a blur. The house, once filled with the noise of our family, now echoed with a haunting silence. I kept busy, trying to distract myself from the emptiness and the hurt. Lily and Max knew something was wrong. They could sense the change in the air, the absence of their father's presence. I sat them down one evening, knowing I had to explain things, even if it broke my heart. "Kids, your dad and I, we're going to be living apart for a while," I said, my voice trembling. "Why, Mom? Did we do something wrong?" Max's innocent eyes searched mine for answers. "No, honey, it's not you. It's just, Dad made some mistakes and we need some time apart," I tried to explain without revealing too much. Lily, older and more perceptive, understood more than I wished she would. "Is Dad not coming back?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, sweetheart," I replied, holding back my own tears. I started the divorce proceedings, a process that was both liberating and soul-crushing. Mike tried to reach out, sending messages of apology, of wanting to talk. But I couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The legal battles began. I fought for the house, for alimony, for everything we had built together. It was a messy, painful process, but I was determined to get what we deserved. One day, I was going through some old boxes and found a photo of Mike and me on our wedding day. I stared at it, at the happy, hopeful faces we once were. It felt like a lifetime ago. "Why did he do it, Mom? Why did Dad hurt us?" Max asked, coming into the room. I put the photo down, looking at my son. "Sometimes people make bad choices, Max, and those choices hurt the people they love." "But do you still love Dad?" he asked, his eyes full of confusion. I sighed, a mix of sadness and resignation in my heart. "I don't know, Max. I'm just trying to figure out what's best for us now." The weeks turned into months. The divorce was finalized, leaving me with a mix of relief and a deep sense of loss. I started focusing more on my photography, taking on more assignments. It was a way to rebuild, to find myself again. One evening, Lily came to me. "Mom, are we going to be okay?" I hugged her, feeling her small body shake with sobs. "Yes, we are. We're going to be just fine." Life didn't stop after the divorce. If anything, it kept moving at a relentless pace. The kids and I settled into a new routine, finding our footing in this altered reality. We were a team, the three of us, facing each day with a mix of resilience and hope. As for Mike, I heard bits and pieces through the grapevine. His world, it seemed, was unraveling at the seams. The women he deceived banded together, filing a collective lawsuit against him. The scandal spilled over into his work, leading to a demotion. He was drowning in debts and legal troubles. But that part of my life was behind me. I had more pressing, more pleasant things to focus on. One sunny afternoon, while I was setting up for a family photo shoot in a park, Lily called me. Her voice was bright, filled with excitement. "Mom, guess what? I won first place in the art competition." "That's wonderful, Lily. I'm so proud of you," I replied, my heart swelling with pride. Max, too, was thriving. He had found a passion for soccer and was making new friends on the team. "Mom, you should come to my game this Saturday. I might score a goal," he said one evening, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. Life with the kids was busy, filled with school events, soccer matches, and art exhibitions. We were a tight unit, supporting each other through thick and thin. My photography business was also picking up. I landed a few big contracts, photographing events, and doing portrait sessions. The lens was my window to the world, allowing me to capture moments of joy, of life moving forward. One evening, as I sat editing photos, I reflected on the past months. The pain of betrayal, the turmoil of the divorce. It all seemed like a distant memory now. I had found strength I didn't know I possessed. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was my friend and neighbor Martha, dropping by with some coffee and a friendly smile. "How are you holding up?" she asked as we sat in the living room. "I'm doing okay, actually." Better than okay, I replied, a sense of contentment washing over me. That's great to hear. You know, you've really inspired me with your strength, Martha said, her eyes sincere. We chatted for a while, talking about work, life, and everything in between. It was nice to have a friend who understood my journey. As Martha left, I looked around my home, filled with laughter, love, and the evidence of a life moving forward. The hardships had not defined us. Instead, they had forged us into something stronger. Life was good, not perfect, but good. And for now, that was more than enough. My name's Melly, and I guess you could say my life turned upside down when I met Alex. We clicked instantly at the accounting firm where we both worked, and before I knew it, we were planning a wedding. I was over the moon, of course, but meeting his family, that was a whole different ballgame. Alex always talked about his mom, Mrs. Donovan, with such admiration. So, the day we were supposed to meet her for dinner, I was a bundle of nerves, smoothing down my simple blue dress and double-checking my reflection for the umpteenth time. Relax, Melly, she's going to love you, Alex assured me as we drove to his childhood home. But the moment we walked through the door, Mrs. Donovan's eyes narrowed as she looked me up and down. Well, you're certainly slender, aren't you? She remarked, her tone cool. I tried to laugh it off. I guess I am. Never been much of an eater. Mrs. Donovan hummed, her expression unreadable. I hope you're taking care of yourself. A woman should have some robustness, you know. Alex, bless him, jumped in. Mom, Melly's just fine. She's healthy. Dinner was an uncomfortable affair. Mrs. Donovan's eyes were constantly on me, making me squirm every time I took a bite. I could feel her judging my every move. The worst part came when I excused myself to the restroom. As I passed the living room, I overheard Mrs. Donovan whispering to her sister, "She looks sickly. How will she bear Alex's healthy children?" I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The rest of the evening was a blur. I barely touched my food and struggled to keep a smile plastered on my face. On the drive back, I was quiet, the words echoing in my mind. Alex noticed. Hey, you okay? You've been quiet since dinner. I sighed. It's nothing. Just tired, I guess. But inside, I was reeling. Mrs. Donovan's words had cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I wondered if this was just the beginning of a long road of judgment and disapproval. Little did I know, it was only the tip of the iceberg. As the days turned into weeks, the dinners at Mrs. Donovan's became a regular ordeal. Each invitation felt like a summons, each meal a trial. Alex, ever the optimist, kept reassuring me that things would get better, but they only seemed to worsen. One particular evening stands out in my memory. We arrived at Mrs. Donovan's to find an even more extravagant spread than usual. The dining table was overflowing with dishes, rich gravies, fatty roasts, and sides heavy with butter and cream. As soon as we sat down, Mrs. Donovan was on the offensive. Melly, you look even thinner than last time. You really should eat more, she said, piling my plate high with food. I tried to protest. Oh, Mrs. Donovan, this is too much. I really can't. Nonsense, she cut me off. You need to build some strength, dear, especially if you and Alex are planning a family. I forced a smile and took a bite. Mrs. Donovan's eyes flickered with something like triumph. I glanced at Alex, hoping for some support, but he just shrugged apologetically. I felt my stomach knot up, not just from the rich food, but from the undercurrent of criticism in her words. Dinner progressed with painful slowness. Mrs. Donovan kept pushing more food my way, commenting on every bite I took, or didn't take. You know, Melly, a good wife should know how to cook hearty meals. It's important for a family. I felt a sting at her words. I do cook, Mrs. Donovan, but I prefer healthier options. She scoffed. Healthy is fine, but this, she gestured at my barely touched plate, is just pickiness. You're setting a bad example. By the end of the meal, I was both nauseous and seething with anger. The drive home was tense. I couldn't hold back anymore. Alex, your mom's comments are really hurtful. It's like she's constantly judging me. Alex was silent for a moment before responding. I know, Melly. I'll talk to her, okay? I'm sure she doesn't mean it the way it sounds. but a part of me doubted that anything would change. Mrs. Donovan had made her feelings clear, and no amount of talking seemed to soften her stance. Each subsequent dinner only reinforced my feelings of inadequacy. Mrs. Donovan's remarks became more pointed, her scrutiny more intense. "Melly, are you avoiding my food deliberately? You barely eat anything I make." I tried to explain. "It's not that, Mrs. Donovan. Your food is very rich, and it doesn't always agree with me." She tutted disapprovingly. "A little discomfort is nothing. You need to eat more, put on some weight. It's not healthy to be so thin." Her words echoed in my head long after each dinner, amplifying my insecurities and doubts. The thought of facing another meal at her house filled me with dread. My relationship with Alex was strong, but the shadow of his mother's disapproval loomed over us, a constant, unsettling presence. As I lay awake many nights, I wondered how long I could endure this. The discomfort in my stomach after each meal was a stark reminder of the growing discomfort in my heart. I felt like an outsider, unwelcome and misunderstood, and I couldn't help but worry about the future of our relationship under the weight of his mother's judgment. As the days rolled into weeks, my unease around Mrs. Donovan turned into outright dread. The constant scrutiny, the endless comments about my weight and eating habits, it was all becoming too much. So I made a decision, one that I knew wouldn't sit well with her. I started avoiding meals at her house. The next time Alex mentioned going over for dinner, I hesitated before speaking up. "Alex, I don't think I can go tonight." He looked surprised. "Why not? Mom's making that roast you liked." I took a deep breath. "It's not about the food. It's... Your mom makes me uncomfortable. I can't keep pretending it's okay." Alex's face fell. "Melly, she's just trying to be caring, in her own way. She doesn't mean to upset you." I shook my head, frustration building up. "It's not caring, Alex. It feels like she's attacking me, always commenting on how I look, what I eat. I can't deal with it anymore." We left it at that, but I could tell Alex was torn. He wanted to keep the peace, but I needed him to understand my side. The next family dinner I missed set off a real storm. Mrs. Donovan called me the next day, her voice icy. "Melly, I noticed you didn't grace us with your presence last night. Is everything all right?" I tried to keep my tone neutral. "Yes, Mrs. Donovan, I just wasn't feeling up to it." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Not feeling up to it? You do realize it's rude to decline family dinners without a good reason. You're part of this family now, or so I thought." Her words stung, and I felt my patience snap. "With all due respect, Mrs. Donovan, being part of this family shouldn't mean I have to endure being criticized all the time." There was a moment of stunned silence before she retorted, "Criticism? I'm merely concerned about your health, Melly. A wife should be strong, healthy. I'm worried you're not suitable for Alex." That hit a nerve. "Suitable? I love Alex and he loves me. That's what matters, not your opinion on my health." The conversation ended soon after, but the damage was done. The rift between us grew wider, deeper. Alex tried to mediate, but his attempts only made things worse. One evening, as we sat quietly in our living room, he broached the subject. "Melly, I spoke to Mom. She's really upset. She thinks you're avoiding her." I let out a bitter laugh. "Avoiding her? She's been nothing but harsh and judgmental since day one. What does she expect?" Alex ran a hand through his hair, looking exasperated. "She's my mom, Melly. I can't just ignore her. Can't you two try to work things out?" I looked at him, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. "Alex, it's not about working things out, it's about respect. She doesn't respect me, and I don't know if I can keep pretending it doesn't hurt." The wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and it was, at least until the reception. Everything was perfect. The ceremony, the vows, Alex looking at me like I was the only one in the room. But then, at the reception, everything changed. I remember holding a glass of wine, the same wine everyone else was drinking. It tasted a bit off, but I figured it was just nerves. I took a sip, and that's the last thing I remember before waking up in a stark, white hospital room. Confused and groggy, I tried to sit up. That's when I heard them, Alex and his mom, just outside my room. Mrs. Donovan's voice was sharp. See what I mean, Alex? She can't even handle a simple toast. She's too weak, too fragile for our family. I felt a pang of hurt, but I was too weak to respond. Alex's voice, full of worry, cut through. Mom, stop it. This isn't the time. We don't even know what happened. I wanted to shout, to tell them I was okay, that I wasn't weak. But my voice was a mere whisper. Then the door opened, and a doctor walked in, a serious look on his face. Mrs. Donovan, he said, addressing me, you gave us quite a scare. We found traces of a sedative in your system. Did you take anything before the ceremony? I shook my head weakly. No, nothing. Just the wine. The doctor frowned. The wine? But no one else had this reaction. It's very unusual. Alex stepped in, his face etched with concern. Doctor, are you saying someone might have tampered with her drink? The doctor hesitated. It's a possibility we can't ignore. We'll need to run some more tests. I lay there, stunned. Someone had drugged me? On my wedding day? But who? And why? As the doctor left to arrange the tests, Alex came to my side, taking my hand. Melly, I'm so sorry. I can't believe this is happening. I tried to smile, to reassure him, but my mind was racing. The only thing I could taste was the bitterness of the wine and Mrs. Donovan's harsh words echoing in my head. That night in the hospital, I couldn't sleep. The realization that someone might have deliberately hurt me was terrifying, and the worst part was not knowing who or why. I looked over at Alex, asleep in the chair next to my bed, and felt a wave of sadness. Our wedding day was supposed to be about us, our love. Instead, it ended with me in a hospital bed, surrounded by suspicion and fear. Back home from the hospital, I was a bundle of nerves. The thought that someone had drugged me at my own wedding was like a dark cloud hanging over me. And deep down, I had a gnawing suspicion about who it might be. One evening, I couldn't hold it in any longer. Alex and I were sitting in the living room, the TV playing some show neither of us was watching. I turned to him, my voice shaky. Alex, I need to talk to you about something serious. He muted the TV, looking concerned. What's up, Melly? I took a deep breath. I've been thinking about what happened at the wedding, and I can't shake off the feeling that your mom might have had something to do with it. Alex's face changed instantly. What? Melly, that's crazy talk. Why would you even think that? I could feel my frustration mounting. Think about it, Alex. All those comments, the way she's always on my case. And then I suddenly fall ill after drinking wine that tasted odd? It's not that far-fetched. Alex stood up, pacing the room. Melly, you're talking about my mom. She can be tough, sure, but she wouldn't do something like that. You're letting your imagination run wild. I stood up too, my voice rising. Am I, Alex? Or have you just been turning a blind eye to all the things she's said and done? Can't you see she doesn't like me? He stopped pacing, looking pained. Melly, this is serious. Accusing someone of drugging you, that's a big deal. You can't just throw around accusations without proof. I felt tears prick my eyes. I thought you'd at least consider what I'm saying, but it seems like you'll always take her side. Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's not about taking sides, Melly. It's about being rational. We can't accuse people based on a hunch. I felt a mix of anger and disappointment. So, what am I supposed to do? Just forget it happened? He came over, trying to put his arm around me, but I stepped back. We need to think this through, Melly. Maybe talk to the police again, see if they found anything new. I nodded, though I felt far from convinced. Fine, we'll talk to them. But Alex, if it turns out I'm right, I don't know what I'll do. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind kept going back to Mrs. Donovan, her words, her looks. The doubt and fear were like a poison, and I knew I had to find the truth, no matter how painful it might be. A couple of weeks after the hospital incident, we were invited to another family gathering at Mrs. Donovan's house. I was hesitant to go, but Alex insisted it would be good for us to show a united front. As we walked into Mrs. Donovan's house, the atmosphere was tense. I could feel eyes on me, whispering under their breath. Mrs. Donovan greeted us with a smile. Melly, dear, "So glad you could make it," she said, her voice dripping with something that didn't quite sound like sincerity. I forced a smile back. "Thank you for having us, Mrs. Donovan." Dinner was served, and I noticed Mrs. Donovan made a point of bringing me a separate dish. "I made this especially for you, Melly, considering your delicate condition." Her emphasis on delicate didn't go unnoticed. I eyed the dish warily. It looked normal, but after the wedding, I couldn't be sure. Alex, oblivious to my discomfort, started eating his meal. I pushed the food around my plate, my appetite gone. Mrs. Donovan watched me, a hint of a smirk on her face. "Not hungry, Melly? I made it just for you." I looked up, meeting her gaze. "I'm just not feeling all that well, Mrs. Donovan, but thank you." The room was filled with murmurs and side glances. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me, judging, questioning. Alex, noticing my discomfort, leaned in. "You okay?" I nodded, but my mind was racing. What if she had done something to the food again? I couldn't take any chances. I whispered to Alex, "Can we switch plates? I'm not comfortable eating this." He looked confused but obliged, swapping our plates. As he reached for a bite of my food, Mrs. Donovan's hand shot out, stopping him. "No, Alex, don't!" she exclaimed, her voice laced with panic. The room went silent. Everyone's eyes were now on her. Alex looked up, startled. "Mom? What's wrong?" Mrs. Donovan's face had lost all color. She stammered, looking for an excuse. It's just... That dish is specially made for Melly. It's not to everyone's taste." I stared at her, my suspicions growing stronger. "Why not, Mrs. Donovan? What's in it that's so special?" She fumbled for words, her usual composure slipping away. It's just a special recipe." The tension in the room was palpable. Alex looked between his mother and me, confusion turning to realization. "Mom, what did you do?" Mrs. Donovan was silent, her eyes darting around the room. I knew then, without a doubt, that my suspicions were right. There was something in that food, something she didn't want Alex to eat. The room was heavy with tension following the incident with the plates. I could feel everyone's eyes on us, on Mrs. Donovan, who looked like she was caught in a trap. Alex, his face a mix of anger and disbelief, turned to his mother. "Mom, what's going on? Why did you freak out about me eating Melly's food?" Mrs. Donovan was fumbling for words, her usual poise nowhere to be seen. "It's nothing, just... It was made for Melly, not for you." I couldn't hold back anymore. "That's not good enough, Mrs. Donovan. You've been against me from the start. What did you put in my food?" The room erupted into murmurs. Mrs. Donovan's eyes darted around, looking for an escape. "I didn't put anything in your food, Melly. This is ridiculous." I stood up, my hands trembling. "It's not ridiculous. Ever since I started coming to these dinners, I felt sick. And then the wedding. Someone drugged my drink, and now this? It's too much of a coincidence." Alex stood up too, his voice firm. "Mom, if you did something to Melly's food, you need to tell us now. This is serious." Mrs. Donovan's face crumpled. I just wanted to protect you, Alex. She's not right for you. She's weak, sickly." I felt a surge of anger. Protect him? By making me sick? By drugging me? The guests were now openly staring, the air thick with accusation and shock. Alex's uncle, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "This is a serious accusation, Melly. Do you have any proof?" I pointed to my plate. "I'm calling the police, and they will give the food prepared by Mrs. Donovan for examination." And then Mrs. Donovan burst into tears. "I just wanted the best for my son. I thought if she was out of the picture, he'd find someone better, someone healthier." The confession hung in the air, heavy and damning. Alex looked at his mother, his expression one of utter betrayal. "You did this to Melly? My wife?" I felt a mix of relief and despair. Relief that the truth was out, but despair at the cost. My relationship with Alex, our place in his family, everything was in shambles. The rest of the evening was a haze. There were arguments, people taking sides, some in disbelief, others in anger. Alex and I left early, the weight of what had happened bearing down on us. As we drove home, neither of us spoke. The silence was oppressive, filled with unasked questions and unspoken fears. What did this mean for us? For our future? The woman who was supposed to be my family had betrayed me in the worst way, and the fallout was something neither Alex nor I were prepared to handle. That night, as I lay in bed, the events of the evening replayed in my mind. Mrs. Donovan's confession, the look of shock on Alex's face, the whispers of the guests. The confrontation had brought the truth to light, but it had also opened a wound that I wasn't sure could ever fully heal. One evening, as Alex and I sat together, the silence between us felt particularly profound. Breaking the stillness, I turned to Alex. We need to talk about what's next, about the police. He looked at me, his expression solemn yet supportive. I've been thinking about that too. It's your decision, Melly. I'll back you up, whatever you choose. I mulled over the thought, feeling the weight of the decision on my shoulders. It's just, going to the police feels like opening a Pandora's box. It's not just about exposing what happened, it's about airing family issues in public. He nodded understandingly. I know it's hard, but remember, you're the one who's been wronged. If you want to pursue this legally, I'm with you. After a pause, I let out a deep breath. No, I don't think I want to go down that road, but there's something else I've decided. I hesitated, gathering my courage. I can't see your mother again, Alex. After everything, I can't. Alex's reaction was quiet, contemplative. I understand. And honestly, I feel the same. After what she did, I can't just carry on as if nothing's happened. I won't see her either. His words were a relief, a validation of my feelings. It's going to be hard, Alex. She's your mother. He squeezed my hand, firm and reassuring. I know, but what she did, it's unforgivable. Our relationship, our marriage, comes first. In the days that followed, we both stood by our decision. It was a difficult period, adjusting to this new reality where Mrs. Donovan was no longer a part of our lives. There were moments of doubt, of questioning whether we were too harsh, but we supported each other through them. We started focusing more on ourselves, on rebuilding and strengthening our bond. We made plans for the future, small things to look forward to, like weekend getaways and quiet evenings together. As we moved forward, I realized that this ordeal, as painful as it was, had brought us closer. We had faced a challenge together, one that tested the very foundation of our relationship and had come out stronger. I always believed that if you worked hard enough, life would eventually reward you. I guess that's what made me Miranda Thompson, top of my class in law school and engaged to the love of my life, Michael. He was everything I thought I wanted, smart, charming, and ambitious. We met in a constitutional law class, and it didn't take long for our study sessions to turn into late-night talks about our future together. Can you believe it, Miranda? In just a week, you'll be Mrs. Miranda Richardson, Michael said, his eyes sparkling with excitement as he wrapped his arms around me. I laughed, leaning into his embrace. I still can't believe you convinced me to take your last name, but yes, I can't wait. But beneath the surface of our perfect little world, there were cracks. My mom, Linda, remarried when I was just a toddler, and my stepdad, Greg, was the only father figure I knew. My biological dad, Dr. James Thompson, was a big shot in the medical world, but just a shadow in my life. We talked occasionally, and he sent gifts on my birthdays, but that was it. Mom made it clear she didn't want him around, and I never pushed it. As the wedding day approached, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness that he wouldn't be there. You okay, honey? My mom asked, noticing my distant look as we went over the seating chart. Yeah, I wish Dad could be here, I admitted, referring to my biological father. Linda sighed, her expression hardening. Miranda, we've been over this. Your stepfather has been more of a dad to you than James ever was. Let's not ruin your big day by bringing up the past. I nodded, not wanting to argue. It was easier that way. My stepsister Sarah was the complete opposite of me. At 20, she was the wild child, always seeking attention, especially from Greg and Mom. They doted on her, and I often felt like an afterthought. Are you seriously still moping about Daddy not coming? "Grow up, Miranda," Sarah chided, rolling her eyes as she walked into the room. "Sarah, that's enough," Linda scolded, but her tone was gentle, almost indulgent. The day before the wedding, the tension was palpable. Michael seemed distant, and Sarah was unusually smug. I tried to shake off the feeling that something was off. "Hey, are you sure you're okay?" I asked Michael as we were setting up the venue. He forced a smile. "Just pre-wedding jitters, babe. Everything's going to be perfect." I wanted to believe him, but something in the pit of my stomach told me otherwise. I wish I had listened to that feeling. The day I had been dreaming of since I was a little girl had finally arrived. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and everything seemed perfect. I stood in front of the mirror, my wedding dress hugging every curve perfectly. "You look beautiful, Miranda," my mom said, her voice soft, a rare moment of tenderness between us. "Thanks, Mom. I just wish Dad could see me," I replied, feeling a familiar ache in my heart. "You have us, Miranda. That's enough," she said, her tone firm, as if closing the topic for good. The ceremony was like something out of a fairy tale. I walked down the aisle, my heart pounding with excitement. Michael stood there, looking handsome as ever, but his eyes, they didn't have the usual warmth. I pushed the thought away, convincing myself it was just nerves. As we stood facing each other, the officiant began, "Do you, Michael Richardson, take Miranda Thompson to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Before Michael could respond, the doors at the back of the hall burst open. It was Sarah, her eyes wild, her face flushed. "Stop! Stop the wedding!" she yelled, her voice echoing through the silent hall. Everyone turned, stunned. I felt like the ground was slipping away beneath me. "Sarah, what are you doing?" I demanded, my voice shaking. She looked at me, then at Michael, a twisted smile on her face. "I'm pregnant, Miranda, and Michael is the father." The room erupted into chaos. My mom and Greg rushed toward Sarah while I stood there, frozen. "Is this true, Michael?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Michael wouldn't meet my eyes. I'm sorry, Miranda. I didn't mean for this to happen." I felt like I couldn't breathe. The world spun around me. "Sorry? You destroy our future and all you can say is sorry?" I spat, my voice rising. My mom came to me, her expression stern. "Miranda, calm down. We need to handle this sensibly." "Calm down? My fiancé cheated on me with my sister, and you want me to calm down?" I couldn't believe her words. "Miranda, it's a complicated situation. Michael is a decent man. He wants to take responsibility for the child," Greg added. "A decent man? A decent man doesn't cheat on his fiancée with her sister." I shot back, my anger boiling over. The guests murmured among themselves, some looking at me with pity, others with judgment. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran out of the hall, the sound of my wedding dress tearing as I pushed through the doors. That day, my dream wedding turned into a nightmare. The betrayal by Michael and Sarah was a harsh blow, but the lack of support from my own family was a stab to the heart. It was clear where their loyalties lay, and it wasn't with me. The morning after the wedding that never was felt surreal. I woke up in my childhood room, the white dress, now stained and torn, a painful reminder of the debacle. My phone was overflowing with messages and missed calls, but I ignored them all. I couldn't face the world, not yet. I could hear my mom and Greg talking downstairs, their voices a low hum. I had no desire to join them. The way they had sided with Sarah and Michael was a betrayal I couldn't digest. I decided then and there that I needed a fresh start, away from all this mess. I picked up my phone and dialed the number I knew by heart, but seldom called. "Dad?" I said hesitantly when the call connected. "Miranda? Is everything okay?" His voice was laced with concern. "Dad, The wedding didn't happen. I need to get away from here. Can I come stay with you?" I asked, my voice breaking. There was a brief pause. "Of course, Miranda. Come as soon as you can," he replied, his tone reassuring. Packing was a blur. I threw clothes and essentials into a suitcase, not caring about the order. When I went downstairs, suitcase in tow, my mom looked up, startled. "Where do you think you're going?" she asked, her tone sharp. "I'm leaving, Mom. I can't stay here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You can't just run away from your problems, Miranda. Greg chimed in, his expression disapproving. This isn't running away. It's choosing not to stay where I'm clearly not wanted, I countered, my resolve firm. My mom's face softened slightly. Miranda, we're your family. You belong here. You made your choice, Mom. Now I'm making mine, I said, turning towards the door. The drive to my dad's city was long and gave me plenty of time to think. I felt a mix of fear, excitement, and uncertainty. Starting over wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. When I arrived, my dad was waiting at the door. He looked older than I remembered. Miranda, I'm so sorry about what happened, he said, pulling me into a hug. Thanks, Dad. I just need to figure things out. Start fresh, I replied, grateful for his support. Over the next few days, Dad helped me settle in. He even introduced me to an old friend of his, Mr. Anderson, who ran a prestigious law firm in the city. Miranda's an excellent lawyer. She graduated top of her class, Dad boasted during the introduction. Mr. Anderson looked at me, his eyes assessing. We could use someone like you in our team. Why don't you come in for an interview next week? I was taken aback by the offer, but managed a grateful smile. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. I'd like that. As I started to rebuild my life in this new city, I realized that sometimes the worst things in life can lead you to where you truly belong. I was ready to face whatever came my way with a new sense of determination and hope. I had been working at Anderson and Amp, associates, for about 6 months when it happened. My life was finally on track, and I was slowly regaining my confidence. That's when Michael Richardson, of all people, walked into the office. I was at my desk, buried in case files, when I heard his all-too-familiar voice. Good morning, everyone. I'm Michael Richardson, the new associate. My head snapped up, and our eyes met. He looked as shocked to see me as I was to see him. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. What are you doing here? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Michael cleared his throat, regaining his composure. I was hired last week. I didn't know you worked here. Mr. Anderson, oblivious to the tension, clapped a hand on Michael's shoulder. Miranda, meet Michael, our new star. You two should get along well, both top of your classes. I forced a smile, feeling like I was going to be sick. Nice to meet you, Michael, I lied. As the days went by, working with Michael became my new reality. I avoided him as much as possible, but it was hard in the small office space. Then, one day, he cornered me in the break room. Miranda, we need to talk, he said, his tone serious. There's nothing to talk about, I replied, trying to move past him. He blocked my way. Please, hear me out. I'm sorry for everything. Sorry doesn't change what happened, Michael. You ruined everything, I said, my voice rising. I know, and I regret it every day. But you need to know, Sarah lost the baby because of the stress from the wedding. She can't have children now. That's on you, he accused. I stared at him, incredulous. On me? You cheat on me, and somehow it's my fault? You're unbelievable. Michael's face hardened. You could have handled it better. You didn't have to run away. I laughed bitterly. Handled it better? You destroyed my life, Michael. You and Sarah. Don't you dare put that on me. He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't want to hear it. I pushed past him and left the room. The nerve of him, blaming me for his and Sarah's actions. It was like a slap in the face, a reminder of the pain and humiliation I had gone through. As I sat back at my desk, trying to calm my racing heart, I realized this was just the beginning. Working with Michael was going to be a challenge, but I was determined not to let him get to me. I had come too far to be dragged down by his guilt and manipulations. The annual corporate party at Anderson and Amp Associates was something I had been looking forward to, a chance to let loose and celebrate our hard work. That was until I found out Michael and his sister Sarah would be there. I had managed to avoid Sarah since the disaster of a wedding, and the thought of facing her now twisted my stomach into knots. I arrived at the party dressed in a simple but elegant black dress, hoping to blend into the background. The atmosphere was lively, with music playing and colleagues laughing. I was grabbing a drink when I heard a familiar, grating voice. Well, well, if it isn't the runaway bride, Sarah sneered, sidling up to me with a glass of champagne in her hand. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. What are you doing here, Sarah? Oh, Michael invited me. After all, I am family, she said, her eyes scanning me up and down. I clenched my jaw. I'm not going to let you ruin this night for me. Sarah laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. I already ruined your life, didn't I? Or should I say, you ruined it yourself with your little tantrum. Before I could respond, Michael joined us, his expression tense. Sarah, let's not do this here. Oh, come on, Michael. Let's see if Miranda can handle the truth for once, Sarah taunted. Michael turned to me, his eyes cold. You should leave, Miranda. You're not wanted here. I stared at him in disbelief. You can't be serious. This is my workplace. I have every right to be here. Sarah smirked. Look at you, playing the victim as always. You're pathetic, Miranda. My anger boiled over. I am not the one who slept with my sister's fiancé. I am not the one who lied and manipulated people. You are the pathetic ones. Michael stepped closer, his voice a low growl. You need to watch your mouth, Miranda. You're walking on thin ice. I met his gaze, unflinching. I'm not afraid of you, Michael, or my twisted sister. Just then, Mr. Anderson appeared, sensing the tension. Is everything all right here? He asked, looking between us. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. Yes, Mr. Anderson, everything is fine. I was just leaving. As I walked away, I could feel their eyes on my back, but I held my head high. I wouldn't let them see how much they affected me. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized that this was far from over. Michael and Sarah were determined to make my life difficult, but I was just as determined to stand my ground. I wouldn't let them break me, not again. The atmosphere in the team was tense. I felt the stares of my colleagues, heard their whispers, which became quieter as I passed by. Michael tried to tell everyone his version of events. It was painful, because I am a victim of that story. And from his words, I turned into a sophisticated sadist, because of which my sister suffered. My boss, Mr. Anderson, supported me, and that was the most important thing. Without his support, I would not have been able to work in such a toxic atmosphere. The only one who didn't know about all this was my father, but that dinner changed everything. Halfway through the meal, my dad, sensing my discomfort, quietly asked, Miranda, you seem troubled. What's on your mind? I hesitated, not sure if I should bring it up, but I needed answers. It's about Sarah and Michael, I began, my voice low. They've been telling everyone that I caused Sarah's miscarriage, that the stress from the wedding was too much for her. Dad's expression changed, a mix of concern and something else, hesitation maybe. Miranda, as a doctor, I'm bound by medical ethics, but you're my daughter, and you deserve the truth. I leaned in, my heart pounding. What truth, Dad? He took a deep breath. Sarah came to me a while back. She was having trouble getting pregnant. But Miranda, she didn't have a miscarriage. She had an abortion. She chose to end the pregnancy herself. The words hit me like a physical blow. An abortion? But why would she lie about that? Dad shook his head, his expression pained. I don't know, Miranda, but she was very clear about her decision. The room seemed to spin around me. Sarah's lies, the deceit, it was deeper than I ever imagined. I felt a surge of anger, not just at her, but at myself for believing her, for letting her words hurt me. I excused myself from the table, my mind racing. I couldn't confront Sarah or Michael, not yet. I needed a plan, a way to expose her lies without causing more drama. It had to be cunning, something that would reveal the truth in a way they couldn't deny. As I drove back home, ideas started to form in my mind. Sarah had played us all for fools, but I wasn't going to let her get away with it. It was time to turn the tables. Armed with the truth about Sarah, I knew I had to act smart. I couldn't just blurt out what I knew. It needed to be strategic, undeniable. That's when the idea of a sting operation came to me. I remembered hearing about a private investigator, a woman reputed for her skill in uncovering truths people wanted to keep buried. I decided to meet her. "Miss Thompson, I understand you need my services," the PI, a woman named Rita, said as we sat in her inconspicuous office. "Yes, it's about my stepsister, Sarah. She's lied about something significant, and I need proof," I explained, trying to keep my emotions in check. Rita leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "What kind of proof are we talking about?" She claimed she had a miscarriage caused by stress I supposedly inflicted, but I know for a fact it was an abortion, I said, feeling a twinge of anger at the memory. Rita nodded, a plan already forming in her mind. "People slip up, especially when they think they're in a safe space. You said she likes to drink at a bar on weekends?" "Yes, she's there almost every Saturday," I confirmed. "Good. I'll befriend her there. If she's as loose-lipped as you say when she's drunk, it shouldn't be too hard to get her to spill the truth," Rita said confidently. The following week was agonizing. I waited, hoping Rita would come through. Then, on Tuesday morning, she called me. "I got it, Miranda. Sarah spilled everything during a drunken rant. It's all on tape." I met Rita that evening to listen to the recording. Hearing Sarah's voice, slurring and boasting about how she fooled everyone, how the baby was never Michael's, and how she never wanted it, sent chills down my spine. "Everyone thinks I'm this poor little girl who lost her baby. Idiots! It was just a fling, and there was no way I was having a black guy's baby." Sarah's voice echoed in the room. I felt a mix of vindication and disgust. "Rita, this is exactly what I needed. How can I ever thank you?" "Just seeing justice served is enough for me," Rita replied, a small smile on her face. Now armed with the truth, I knew it was time to confront Sarah and Michael. But I wanted to be careful, to reveal the truth in a way that left no room for doubt or further lies. I planned to invite them to a neutral place, somewhere public where they couldn't cause a scene. The day of the confrontation, my nerves were on edge, but I felt a sense of empowerment too. This was it, the moment of truth. The day had come to confront Sarah and Michael with the truth. My heart was racing as I sat in the corner of the coffee shop, waiting for them to arrive. I had chosen this place for its public setting, hoping it would keep emotions in check. Sarah walked in first, her usual confident self, followed by Michael, who looked unsure. They sat down opposite me, Sarah's eyes narrowing slightly. "So, Miranda, what's so important that you dragged us here? Do you finally want to apologize and get out of the company?" I took a deep breath, my hands gripping the envelope containing the recording. "I know everything, Sarah." Her face went pale, then flushed with anger. "What are you talking about, Miranda?" Michael looked between us, confused. "Sarah, what is she talking about?" I pushed the envelope across the table. "I hired a private investigator. She recorded Sarah admitting everything at a bar. It wasn't a miscarriage. She lied." Sarah's eyes widened in shock, and then her gaze turned to one of malice. "You sneaky little..." Michael cut her off, his voice shaking. "Is it true, Sarah? Did you lie to me?" Sarah opened and closed her mouth, looking like a fish out of water. Finally, she slumped back in her chair, defeated. "Yes, it's true. I had an abortion. The baby wasn't yours." Michael looked like he had been punched in the gut. He turned to me. "Miranda, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I'll file for divorce, and maybe we..." I looked at him, feeling a strange sense of detachment. "Your apology doesn't change what happened, Michael, but at least now you know the truth." Sarah stood up abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. "This isn't over, Miranda. You'll regret this." But I didn't feel scared. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control. "The truth is out, Sarah. There's nothing left to hide." As they left the coffee shop, keeping their distance from each other, I remained seated, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. It was finally over. The lies, the deceit, the pain, it was all out in the open. The next day at work, word had spread about the confrontation. Colleagues who had once looked at me with pity and contempt now greeted me with respect. Mr. Anderson called me into his office, a look of concern on his face. "Miranda, I heard about what happened. Are you okay?" he asked, genuine worry in his tone. I smiled, feeling a sense of peace. "Yes, Mr. Anderson. I'm more than okay. I'm free. As I walked back to my desk, I felt a new sense of purpose. I had faced my demons, and I had come out stronger. My past no longer defined me. I was ready to move on, to build a future on my terms.